She just found an iron wire and shaped it into a hook, then she quietly moved it inside the keyhole of the iron chains. Several seconds later, there was a clunk sound and the lock to the iron chains loosened. Once Gu Liufeng's body was separated from the chains, his body seemed to have lost all strength as he toppled to the floor. Startled, Hushi immediately reached her hand out to bring his weak body closer, having him rest entirely on her body. In order to ensure that he felt comfortable when leaning on her, she had the purple abyss vine lend additional support. She raised her head and gazed at Gu Liufeng's complexion face with concern. "Hello, are you still good?" In a daze, Gu Lufeng looked up at her and gazed at her pair of glassy black and limpid eyes. They were full of concern and didn't carry a trace of disgust. He was silent for a good moment before his hoarse voice suddenly rang out. "Little Schwer, you don't think I'm disgusting?" "Disgusting." Hushi's face was stupefied. She looked at him like she was looking at an idiot. "Just because this brute wanted to do errant things to you, you're disgusting?" "Gu Lufeng, are you sure your brain isn't ill, ah?" Meeting Gu Liufeng's sluggish gaze, Hushi unhappily retorted. "You were bitten by a beast, thinking that he wasn't a beast but a bast. You should kill him for revenge, rather than thinking that you were bitten because you're disgusting. And isn't it because the beast is too vicious? You say that your brain isn't ill, but why have you brought concern onto yourself?" All of a sudden, Gu Lufeng was dumbfounded. In a split second, all the grief and despair in his heart seemed like bubbles that had suddenly been popped, disappearing without a trace. The youth's jade-like face was near, her eyes were clear and resolute. The corner of her mouth hooked into a shallow smile, and her whole body gave off the manner of, "Who am I angry at?" Gu Lufeng felt as if he was too weak and useless when compared to this youth. He suddenly reached his hand up to feel the wound on his face and lowly mumbled, "Shiyai, do you know how I got this scar?" When he saw Shiyu looking at himself, he dismally laughed at himself and slowly said, "When I was 15, Murong Linfeng poisoned me and intended to violate me. Fortunately, during this time, I suddenly broke through to Meridian's stage. Eventually, I escaped from his evil clutches, and was even able to seriously injure him. But after Morong family learned of these matters, not only did they not severely punish Morong Linfeng, they merely beat him once and then said that I was a man-seducing slut, that I was just as shameless as my mom. And when those clan elders saw my body and natural aptitude, they wanted to raise me in a cultivation stove. Hee, this is the Morong family of Yanjing City's 4 big families. From the outside, it's bright and beautiful, but inside it has long since become extremely rotten, even filthier than sewer rats." Indescribable anger and hatred appeared on Gu Liufeng's face, the hands by his side tightened into fists. "I was left helpless. The only thing I could do was use a special medicine to scratch my own face and even pretend that all my cultivation had wasted away, so that they would chase me out of Morong Manor. Over these past 10 years, I've done all I could to cultivate. Even if I lowered my lifespan or ignited my dantian, I didn't let it stop me. After 10 years, I reached the summit of Gold Core stage. During my most difficult times, I let my hatred for Morong family motivate me to keep going. If it weren't for the fact that my mother is still in their hands, or that she was still sick, I would have already killed Morong family, this group of brutes, without sparing even the lives of the chickens and dogs, long ago. Shiyu, I hate them. I can't wait to eat their meat, drink their blood, and dismember these scums into 1,000 pieces." Hushi quietly listened as Gu Lufeng vented out his year's worth of anger and hate. She didn't try to comfort him, nor did she have a sympathetic expression on her face, because she knew that Gu Lufeng didn't need these things. When Gu Lufeng finished speaking, she indifferently said, "However you wish to handle Morong family, count me in. I'll help you." Suddenly, Gu Lufeng lifted his head up and looked at her. His voice was husky. "Shiyu, what you owe me has long since already been repaid, and now, I owe you even more. Why do you want to help me?" "I don't know." Hushi lightly laughed. Her eyes had a faint thread of brilliance. "It could be because Morong family, this group of brutes, are unpleasing to the eye. It could be because I'm bored senseless. It could also be because you were the first to say that I was your friend. Regardless of his reasons, I, Shiyu, only do what I want to do. I follow my heart's desires. What reason do I need? The dark rays in Gu Liufeng's eyes slowly illuminated, and the concentrated gloominess and despair also gradually changed into starlight. In the blink of an eye, he felt as if all the hatred, darkness, humiliation and pain he felt for years turned insignificant. Perhaps the despair he previously felt was just waiting for this moment. When light and hope arrived, He kicked at the unconscious Morong Linfeng and asked, "How do you want to deal with him?" Gu Lufeng composed himself and pressed down his raging emotions. Then he walked over to the flat iron that had already been heated until it was red. He hugged herself and stood off to the side. She expressionlessly watched Gu Liufeng's actions. The purple abyss vine wordlessly flew out and separated this prison from the outside world. Gu Lufeng slowly walked in front of Morong Linfeng. His eyes were filled with raging emotions. There was loathing, hostility, detest, and killing intent. Then, he resolutely brought the flat iron down and firmly pressed down on Morong Linfeng's crotch. The sound of sizzling echoed in the prison, and then the sound of a piece of flesh being burnt was heard. Soon after, the previously unconscious Morong Linfeng came to and let out a miserable howl. His entire body was curled up like a shrimp as he shrieked, rolling about on the floor. His face was covered in sweat and tears, and when he opened his eyes, all he saw was Gu Liufeng's gorgeous face as he sneered at him. The horizontal scar across his face looked like a red blade that was waving at him, taking his life. Morong Linfeng pointed at Gu Lufeng and said, his voice trembling, "How did you escape?" He looked at the flat iron in Gu Liufeng's hand as he slowly advanced forward, and was scared so much his body began to shake. "You don't come over here. What do you want to do?" If you were to kill me, my father and my mother will never let you off. Morong family won't let you off." "Morong Lufeng, I'm telling you, me looking upon you is your good fortune. You're nothing more but Morong family's bastard. By following me you can learn Morong family's most profound method. The second time the flat iron struck, it firmly pressed down on his crotch again. Morong Linfeng couldn't bear it any longer, and with one last frail howl, he sank into unconsciousness. Now the bottom half of him was badly mangled. The material of his trousers and his burnt skin stuck together into a ball. Upon seeing it, one would feel unspeakable nausea and fright. When he saw this sight, Gu Lufeng felt pleased. He threw the flat iron away and coldly remarked, "Morong Linfeng, I want to see how you'll perform illicit matters with that thing in your crotch in the future." He raised her eyebrow. "He's such a brute. Do you intend to let him off just like this?" As she was speaking, she was also taking a piece of wide clothing and a bottle of replenishing spirit pills, and threw them at Gu Lufeng. This piece of clothing had a water and fire defense attribute. She got it from trading in the 100 herb mist. It was considered a rarely seen magic item. But the clothing was too wide, as it was intended for men, so He had forgotten it and left it in a corner to collect dust. Now it was just perfect for Gu Lufeng to wear. When Gu Lufeng thought that he had been entirely naked in front of He, his face reddened. Flustered, he hurriedly took the clothing and put it on. Then he took a deep breath before answering her. "Morong family still has some information that can be used against my mother. Moreover, my mother is still in their hands. By leaving Morong Linfeng, perhaps he can become a hostage later." He nodded her head. Depending on Gu Liufeng's strength, if they wanted to escape, nobody in Morong family was his opponent. Zhou Yan'an had already said that if Gu Lufeng was captured, it was because Morong family had information that could be used against him. But He's heart was filled with doubt as she looked at the badly mutilated Morong Linfeng. Would Morong family give Gu Lufeng to bargain with them using such a piece of waste? Thinking up to here, He's heart suddenly moved and she stopped Gu Lufeng from bringing Morong Linfeng. "Wait a moment." He's mouth curved into a shallow arch. "I have an even better idea." The youth's eyes glammed and filled with craftiness. It contrasted against his originally cold appearance. That sort of liveliness was extremely colorful. Gu Lufeng was startled, foolishly staring as he stood there. He watched as He bent down and with tools he hadn't realized she had, began to smear something on Morong Linfeng's face and body. A moment later, Gu Lufeng looked towards Morong Linfeng's body again, and his eyes widened. This This. The person in front of him no longer looked like Murong Linfeng. Instead, he looked exactly the same as himself, Gu Lufeng. Even the badly mangled crotch injury was changed into a common stab, under Hushi's skillful hands. Gu Lufeng stuttered for a while before he finally said with his voice filled with disbelief, "Shiyu, how did you do it? I used spiritual energy to check and didn't feel as if he was a fake at all?" Hushi lightly pouted and faintly laughed as she said, "You still aren't binding Gu Lufeng up? Since Gu Lufeng still hasn't escaped, you should be completely free from worry about the information that they can use against you, right?" Gu Liufeng's face filled with joy and he immediately ran over to tie Murong Linfeng with the black, iron chains. After tying Murong Linfeng up, the two people set out to depart when Gu Lufeng suddenly pulled on Hushi and whispered, "People are coming." Under the healing of Hushi's medicines, Gu Liufeng's power was almost completely replenished. Now, with the strength at the summit of a gold core stage, although he didn't dare to use divine knowledge, any area within 10 meters of Gu Lufeng wouldn't be able to escape him. The two people looked at each other and quickly found a place to conceal themselves. The place the pair of them hid in was very narrow. Their bodies were practically pasted to each other. Gu Lufeng could smell the faint fragrance on Hushi's body. It smelled lightly of medicine. It filled his nose like the strongest rushing feeling drug, causing his heart to beat like a drum. His whole face was red. At this moment, he genuinely discovered Shiyu's skin was pure white, his lips were tender and bright red, and his body was petite and fine. Chapter 426 Murong Linfeng fading away. A butterfly-looking collarbone rested underneath that slender neck. The gorgeous curve opened up to his lapel. Even the most miraculous craftsman would be incapable of carving a portrayal that even half as elegant. Gu Lufeng suddenly felt as if his mouth was dry and that was nearly incapable of breathing. He couldn't suppress the urge to roughly gasp for breath. Hushi cast a glance at him and saw that his complexion was strange. She thought that the people who had come were his biggest enemies, causing him to become unable to control his mood. At once, she fished out a pill from her bosom. "This is a calming anger pill. It controls your breathing and spiritual power fluctuations, so that nobody else will find you. If not, then all our efforts have been wasted." Gu Lufeng met Hushi's clear eyes. Those eyes were muddled. Apart from concern, there was also concern. He suddenly felt as if he wanted to slap himself. Shiyu had ran over here, in the face of danger, and regarded him as a good friend, but he was doing nothing but thinking of filthy thoughts. Gu Lufeng took a deep breath and pressed his turbulent emotions down. Then he began to conceal his breathing and spiritual power movements, until it seemed as if it wasn't there at all. And right at this moment, a woman's voice sounded by the doorway. "Outrageous. The prison is such an important place. Yet you dare to neglect your duties and sleep here? Do you want to die? Didn't see anyone here? And you're still not standing up for me." Those 3 guards had been given knockout drugs by Hushi. Now, they woke up and were completely bewildered. When they woke up some more and saw the people who arrived, they were immediately terror-stricken. "Madam." Subordinate seized Madam. For a moment, it was silent. Then a dignified woman's voice sounded. "Is second young master here?" The guard hesitated and stammered, and for a long time he didn't dare say a word. The woman's voice suddenly turned cold. "If you don't want to die, then quickly speak. Did second young master come to find that slut?" Replying to Madam, "Yes. Yes, he did. 1 hour before, second young master went in there." Their words just came out and the prison doors opened with a prung sound. Hidden in the secret place, Hushi saw the woman burst inside the prison with an angry face. Her head was covered full of green jade beads, and she was gracefully and luxuriously dressed. As she was entering, she was also angrily shouting, "Murong Lufeng, you shameless slut. Today, I will definitely skin you, you seducing slut." But when she entered into the prison, she discovered that the prison was completely empty. Apart from the locked up and unconscious Gu Lufeng, there was nobody else. Madame Murong fiercely turned to glare at the guards and sternly yelled at them. "Didn't you say that second young master came in here? Where is he?" Shock was written across the guards' faces as well. They had clearly seen the second young master enter. This This prison wasn't any more than 10 square meters, but it was plainly visible that Murong Linfeng wasn't here. So where was he? The servant girl that followed behind Madame Murong neared her and whispered in her ear. Second young master probably. Already finished playing and left. Those guards slacked off and fell asleep. Of course, they don't know when the second young master left. Listening to the servant girl's words, Madame Murong's gaze rested on Gu Liufeng's body. She saw that his clothes were untidy and his appearance was haggard. The mask on his face had long since been taken off, exposing his beautiful face, which made her embarrassed and envious, as well as his snow-white skin. Slut. Shameless bast. Bitterness and hatred bubbled forth in Madame Murong's heart. Grabbing the nearby bucket of salt water, she resolutely splashed it on his wounds. The tortured Gu Lufeng let out miserable cries and incessantly moaned as he began to slowly open his eyes up. Without waiting for him to register the people who had come, the unresolved Madame Murong had already brought the heated flat iron and ruthlessly pressed it down on his face. The sound of burning flesh that caused people's tooths to ache sounded again. Following that was the smell of barbecue. The Gu Lufeng being tortured couldn't speak through the pain. All he could do was let out blood-curdling screeches. Madame Murong looked at his pitiful appearance and felt extremely cheerful in her heart. Laughing, she said, "Shameless bast, didn't you just rely on this face of yours to seduce Linfeng? Seeing as I've ruined your face now, I'd like to see how you can entice my son again." Ha ha ha. The tortured Gu Lufeng had clearly also heard Madame Murong because his face held an expression filled with shock. He looked down to look at himself and began to frantically struggle, but he discovered that he couldn't even budge. Regardless of whether it was his face or crotch, there was heart-tearing and lung-splitting pain from both. But what was the scariest fact was that his own mother stood in front of him but didn't recognize him. Instead she called him Murong Linfeng. Gu Lufeng opened his mouth wide and yelled out in his hoarse voice, "Mother, it's me, ah. I am Linfeng, I'm your son, ah. Save me. Save me." But his face had been burned by the flat iron. Even his lips were inflamed. So all his words were intelligible. Madame Murong didn't understand what he was saying at all. Seeing him screaming and crying with his eyes full of dread, she actually felt incomparably carefree. Taking a hairpin out of her hair, she randomly stabbed at his face. "Ha ha ha. Little bast. What are you? You're nothing more than the random goods some depraved and crazy woman gave birth to. But unexpectedly, your aptitude is higher than my son, and you even dare to seduce my son. I spit on you. You're just the same as that mother of yours, stepped on by other people for a lifetime. By slut damn bast." To a martial artist, the hairpin coming down wasn't a threat to their life whatsoever. But this face was quickly mutilated by her. That fright and pain couldn't be matched by any normal torture method. All along, Murong Linfeng had been begging for forgiveness, until finally, he drew his last breath and his voice became weaker and weaker, slowly tapering off until he wasn't heard anymore. Roughly breathing, Madame Murong opened her eyes, and as she watched Gu Lufeng, she recalled the humiliation she suffered under this mother and son pair those few years prior, and wished she could tear this little bast to shreds. But no matter what, the people in Murong family wanted to leave this little bast and slut alive, causing her to be unable to make peace with this resentment. All of a sudden, it seemed as if she had thought of something. Quickly walking over to a corner in the interrogation room, Madame Murong evilly grinned and opened one of the mechanisms. Quickly, a wooden suitcase that was approximately half a person tall appeared. Inside the wooden suitcase, a disheveled-haired woman lay curled up in it. All they saw was that this woman was red all over, from head to toe. Her body was covered in numerous scars. Moreover, these scars were folding over each other. New and old scars overlapped each other. It was extremely evident that this woman had never stopped being tortured. But what shocked Hushi the most was that this person was 6 meters tall, but day and night, she had been locked up in this 1-meter-tall suitcase, curled up and incapable of unfolding. What kind of torment was this? When she laid her eyes upon this person, Hushi felt the nearby Gu Lufeng tense up, and noticed his eyes turned as red as blood. If it weren't for Hushi holding him back, he would have recklessly rushed out. Madame Murong grabbed onto her hair, and pulled her out of the suitcase. dragging her like she would trash until she was in front of Gu Lufeng. Off to the side, the guard's face was panic-stricken. Nearing her, he quietly whispered, "Before Master said that we couldn't recklessly take her out without his order. You one doing this. One you. When the guard is saying you, he's saying, Neen, which is a more formal way of saying you versus, an I, which is more informal." Chapter 428 Terrifying Fact Wanton. Madame Morong quickly slapped him and grimly laughed. "Am I the madam or are you the madam? When I'm handling matters, I still need you to come and teach me. I pulled this slut out only to let these two mother and son look at each other's miserable and humiliated states. Naturally, before Master comes back, she will be sent back. What do you have to be anxious about? Xiao Huan, bring those three out for me and guard them by the doorway. Don't let anyone enter. If Master comes, remember to notify me." The servant girl following by Madame Morong's side immediately answered yes, and with a cold face, she promptly rushed the three guards outside. Madame Morong looked at the woman who was crawling on the floor like a dog and burst into laughter. "Gu Yulan, you slut, at that time you were so high up. Did you ever think that you would meet this day? Did you think that your son would meet this day? Before, when I tortured you, weren't you indifferent? Didn't you disdainfully glance at me? Now I'll look. I want to see if you can still remain so calm when I'm torturing your son." Finished speaking, she took a whip that had been wet with salt water and firmly struck at Gu Yulan's body, intending to first wake her up. But just when her whip had reached midair, her wrist was suddenly pulled on by an iron claw. "Who dares to block me?" Madame Morong angrily yelled out, and turned around to look behind her. But when she turned around to look at the person behind her, her face was suddenly overwhelmed with shock. She could only gasp, "You? How did you?" Gu Liufeng's face was illuminated by the coal fire. His beautiful facial features and red scar stung Madame Morong's eyes, causing them to ache. Madame Morong looked at the tortured and tied up Gu Lufeng, then looked at the person in front of her. Her voice trembled. "You? Who are you?" "Who am I?" Gu Liufeng's mouth lifted up into an icy smile, then he replied with mockery laced in his tone. "Madam really has a short memory. Just then, you kept saying I was a slut. Now you can't even recognize me?" Madame Morong stumbled and fell backwards, crashing into the tied-up Gu Lufeng behind her. That person let out a pained scream, and at this moment, that voice rung in Madame Morong's ears. The voice was so familiar to her, it caused her to be scared out of her wits. You say you're Gu Lufeng? Then who is he?" She slowly stepped out of the shadows and walked up to Gu Liufeng's side. The purple abyss vine in her hands flew out and held onto Murong Linfeng's face. The purple vine wiped a little and immediately, Murong Linfeng's face and body restored into its previous state. Although his face had already been destroyed by Madame Morong, the left side of his chest still held a very eye-catching birthmark. This was the birthmark that only her son, Murong Linfeng, had. "Ah!" Madame Morong let out a heart-tearing and lung-splitting screech as she recoiled backwards, as if the person that was tied up was a goblin. "No. It's not possible. It can't be Linfeng. It can't be my son. You cheated me. It was you, this slut, who cheated me." Just then, the person she expended great efforts to torture, the person she hated with all her heart and whom she wanted to die, actually wasn't Murong Linfeng, that de *** bast, but instead her beloved son? This terrifying fact caused Madame Morong to shake all over, causing her to be on the verge of insanity. Her two eyes bulged out as she let out a hysterical roar. Rushing towards Gu Lufeng, she wanted to fight with him. But she was nothing more than an insignificant foundation establishment stage. How could she contend against Gu Lufeng at all? All it took was the wave of a hand and she collapsed on the floor. Her hair was in a disarray and she was battered and exhausted. Taking a whip moistened with salt water, Gu Lufeng ruthlessly whipped her body. "When you tortured my mother, weren't you rampant, very proud of yourself? When you tortured this mother and son pair, didn't you act all high and mighty, regarding us as animals?" Unable to completely dissolve his hatred with just the whip, Gu Lufeng took the flat iron laying nearby and firmly pressed it on her body. Then he grabbed the bucket of salt water and poured it on her. Madame Morong let out a blood-curdling scream. She incessantly rolled about on the floor as she begged for forgiveness. I was wrong, I was wrong. I'm begging you to let me off, ah. Gu Lufeng, you slut. You dare to act like this towards us, you don't deserve an easy death. Gu Liufeng's expression was very calm, but his eyes were filled with raging flames. At this moment, the pain and torture that this mother and son pair inflicted upon him flashed through his eyes. Every day, he was itching to peel their skin off and break their bones, to break them down into bones and scatter their ashes in the wind. Every day, he endured the fear of his mother being tortured and the hatred towards himself. He suffered in this anxious state. Finally, the heavens had eyes. Today, these two people finally fell into his hands. How should he strip them apart in order to appease the hatred he felt towards them? Suddenly, a hand gripped the hand that held the torture tool. Gu Lufeng lifted his head up and came into contact with Shiyu's delicate complexion and shining eyes. Towards him, He shook her head. Leave them, they're still useful. If you want to calculate a debt, it would be better to wait until Morong family has been destroyed. Then, you can calculate your debt with the whole group of people. During that time, wouldn't it be more straightforward? Gu Liufeng's hand loosened, and the iron in his hand fell to the floor with a pung sound. He nodded his head and softly said, Thank you, Shiyu. No. He now knew that it wasn't because the heavens had eyes that he was saved, it wasn't because the heavens had eyes that he could take revenge. Instead, it was because of this person in front of him. Because of a youth as bright as the moon and as dazzling as the sun appeared in his world, who went by the name Shiyu. He took off Madame Morong's clothes and quickly transformed her appearance into Gu Yolan's. In order to make it appear more real, He used a whip to lash at Madame Morong's body numerous times in order to create countless scars. She also used medicine to make these scars look older. Under these several actions, Madame Morong was brought to her last breath and fainted. She smiled and pricked the back of her head with a silver needle. After the silver needle had pricked her, Madame Morong wouldn't be able to speak, use spiritual power, and would even sometimes become erratic. As for the locked-up Morong Linfeng, his tongue had been badly burned and he couldn't freely speak as he wished. Adding on to that fact was that he couldn't use his spiritual power. The black, iron chains kept him from doing so. His cultivation level was indistinguishable, causing nobody to realize that he had been switched out. He stored the unconscious Madame Morong into the wooden suitcase and faintly laughed. Compared with the scars on her body, letting her experience the taste of being locked inside this suitcase is even more terrifying and torturous to a person's heart. Most likely, before she's even discovered, she would have already been driven mad. Gu Lufeng carried his unconscious mother. His eyes were filled with endless amounts of distress. His mother had suffered this torture, non-stop. Fortunately, all the nightmares have passed. The two people knocked the 3 guards outside unconscious and left Morong Manor's prison. Once they entered Morong Manor's inner courtyard, He saw that Gu Liufeng's pair of eyes rigidly stared towards the direction of the master's room. His eyes were filled full of hatred, as if he would rush in and fight in the next moment. Chapter 430 Bound. He grabbed onto him and lowly said, Tonight you can't fight. This Morong Manor has an unknown expert. His cultivation level may even be higher than yours. Let alone to say that today, your mother's safety is the top priority. Gu Liufeng's expression returned. He dipped his head in shame, and a trace of guilt flitted across his eyes. He used the purple abyss vine to wrap around Gu Lufeng. It jumped off his body and noiselessly left Morong Manor, and disappeared into Yanjing City's streets. By this time it had already passed Choushi, 1, and Yanjing City's eastern main streets were quiet. The only sound was the sounds of the wind blowing under the dusky lanterns on both sides, shining upon an ample space with its serene light. But it was only at this time that Zhou Yan'an dared to step out of Shengda Hall's second floor. His entire person seemed like a cat on a hot tin roof, incessantly walking around in front of the door. On one hand, he was worried about young master's situation, and on the other hand, he hated himself for putting He in a difficult situation. His originally young and scholarly face was lined with wrinkles. Suddenly, Zhou Yan'an heard a familiar and clear voice. Zhou shopkeeper, until what time do you want to pace around under there? Zhou Yan'an happily raised his head up, and looked toward Shengda Hall's second floor. Sure enough, he saw Hushi's half-lit up and half-darkened beautiful appearance. But what caused him to be even more surprised was that a tall and youthful male stood beside Hushi's body. If it wasn't the young master, Gu Lufeng, then who was it? Zhou Yan'an felt his blood surge and was suddenly filled with ecstasy. He nearly laughed. Fortunately, he maintained himself. With a face filled with happiness, he rushed onto the second floor. Shigongzi, you really did bring young master back. Zhou Yan'an rushed into the room. He couldn't help but loudly yell. His voice was choked with emotion. When he finally saw Gu Lufeng completely intact and standing in front of him, Zhou Yan'an couldn't help it any longer, and knelt down in front of Hushi, knocking his head against the floor multiple times. Shigongzi, your too large favor and kindness, I really don't know how to repay you. If it weren't for you, Hushi's mouth twitched. Why were there so many people who liked to kneel in front of her over these past few days? If the amount of people who kowtowed in front of you really shortened one's life, she would already be close to dropping dead by now. Hushi unhappily cast a glance at Gu Lufeng. Her meaning was clear. Your own person should be dealt with yourself. What she was the worst at was dealing with such emotional scenes. Single-handedly, Gu Lufeng clenched his fist against his lips, but his face shone with a long-lost smile. When he applied the spiritual power in his hand, Zhou Yan'an was lightly propped up. Okay, Yan'an, Shiyu isn't an outsider. Moreover, you'll have plenty of times to kneel to him in the future. Hushi was distracted for a moment. What talk about having more time in the future to kneel to her? What nonsense was Gu Lufeng spouting? But Gu Lufeng had already switched the topic. Yan'an, first find something to bind my mother up. When Gu Liufeng's words came out, both Hushi and Zhou Yan'an's faces had astonishment written across them. Previously, Zhou Yan'an had been wholly focused on Gu Lufeng and Hushi. He didn't notice the disheveled woman on the bed. At this moment he let out a cry. Young master, Shigongzi, you guys even rescued madam. But surprise turned into surprise. Zhou Yan'an looked at the time, and his face showed a nervous expression. At once, he found a sturdy rope from inside the room, and helped Gu Lufeng tie Gu Yulan up. Facing Hushi's doubtful expression, Gu Lufeng wiped the thin layer of sweat on his forehead and lowly said, when my mother has an outbreak, she'll lose all sense and try to harm herself in any way possible. 1 Chosher. Time between 1 to 3 a.m. to you. When he says you, he's saying it courteously. Chapter 431 Outbreak. Aside from taking Morong family's medicine or tying her up like this, I don't have any other method. Just as if it was confirming his words, Gu Lufeng didn't finish speaking before he was interrupted. The originally unconscious Gu Yulan suddenly began to violently struggle. Her strength was strong to an unimaginable degree. She was clearly completely tied up, but her entire body acted as if she was a shrimp caught on fire, incessantly fidgeting. The bed continuously creaked under her movements. At the same time, she was letting out animalistic screams. Her voice was laced with suffering and despair. Gu Lufeng foolishly stood to the side. He looked at Gu Yulan with sorrow-filled eyes. His gloomy voice seemed to come from a distant place. Since the start of my memories, my mother has always been like this. Clearly, just a moment before, she was still carried in my tender words and eating pastries. But suddenly, she'll seem as if she's in extreme pain and falling to the floor, incessantly rolling about and shouting. At this time, my mother has lost all reason. She doesn't recognize anyone. As long as she sees Morong Feng, she'll kneel in front of him and beg for the antidote. Then I'll helplessly look on as Morong Feng, and the rest of those Bastin Morong family, beat and humiliate her as they loudly laugh. When they're finally appeased and stop beating and humiliating my mother, they finally let her eat the antidote. At that time, I was a weak coward. Apart from hiding to the side and silently shedding tears, apart from begging them to stop beating mother, I couldn't do anything else. Gu Lufeng wiped his tears away and faced Hushi, who was earnestly looking at him. The fear and desperation in his heart slowly faded away and his voice turned milder. But at that time, the frequency of my mother's outbreaks weren't high. Each time she had an outbreak, all she had to do was eat one of Morong family's pills, and she would be fine for a spell. But as I grew older, my mother had more and more outbreaks. Before, it was once every 3 days, later on it became 4 or 5 times a day. Even later on, even if mother ate the pill, the times she was clear-headed became less and less. Listening to Gu Liufeng's description, Hushi turned her head towards the struggling, screaming, and even tearing at the bedsheets Gu Yulan. Furthermore, if you listened carefully, you could even make out in her screams, "Give me the cold food pill. Begging you to give me the cold food pill. Brute. Brute." Hushi suddenly lowered her voice. "Do you still have any more of the pills that Murong family gives your mother?" Gu Lufeng shook his head. "That year when I was 18 years old, I scratched up my own face and pretended that my cultivation was completely wasted. Then, I secretly ran away. Originally, I wanted to bring mother with me, but mother's strange illness left me helpless. I didn't even let myself dream of that. If I brought mother away and she didn't have any more of that pill, she would feel a larger amount of pain and may not live much longer. Over these past few years, I never stopped thinking of ways to steal the pill. But even though Murong Manor is lacking in experts, its defense is extremely rigid. Moreover, up until now, I still don't know how the pill looks like. Even if I could sneak into Murong Manor, I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to find it. Afterwards, Jiujio 1 hid me as a gold core stage guard in Murong family. During that time, I secretly searched everywhere in the manor, but I was never able to find the pill's whereabouts." Gu Liufeng's gaze was profound as he gazed at Hushi. His voice was hoarse. "Shiyu, now, you're my only hope. If even you can't help my mother get better, I don't want to see my mother, in such an undignified state, continue to live on in pain." Chapter 432. Able to treat. After saying the last sentence, Gu Liufeng's eyes filled with determination. But his entire being emitted an extremely sorrowful and pained feeling. Having to choose to personally kill one's own mother, or watch her in pain and undignified, was an extremely hard choice for anyone. Hushi nodded her head and didn't say much more. Instead, she leaned over and felt Gu Yulan's pulse. As before, Gu Yulan was still struggling and howling, but the strength of her struggling was almost nothing to Hushi. But this time when she checked her pulse, it lasted for an hour. Retracting the hand that was feeling her pulse, Hushi's face didn't have the slightest amount of gentleness. Then she looked down at the open-eyed and open-mouthed Gu Lufeng. By the side, Gu Lufeng even stopped breathing as he watched Hushi. Only until he saw her standing up, he softly asked, "What is your diagnosis, Shiyu?" He deeply sucked in a breath and swallowed the words he originally wanted to say. He didn't want to hear a conclusion that he didn't want to hear. "Shiyu, the medicine that Murong family gave me has a problem, right?" Gu Lufeng was silent for half a day before he asked, If I was able to get that pill, would it be more helpful to treating the illness?" As long as there's a thread of hope, I'll do anything. As long as you can save my mother's life." Hushi used the nearby water to clean her hands before saying, "You can rest relieved. Although your mother's illness is somewhat troublesome, I can still treat it." "What?" Gu Lufeng cried out in surprise. Even his voice trembled a bit. "Shiyu, what you said is true. You can cure my mother? Truly cure my mother?" Hushi raised her eyebrow. The pleasant-to-listen-to youth's voice was filled with assertiveness. "Have you forgotten what I've said? I can't save everyone, but as long as Shiyu, say I can save them, even Yama can't take them away. But your mother's body has already reached this stage of being a dried-out lamp. It's very possible that she'll be unable to cultivate, and without the use of life-preserving medicines, she can only live up to the age of a normal person." "It's enough." Gu Lufeng pressed his strong emotions down and with a trembling voice he said to Hushi, "Shiyu, I don't even know what words of gratitude to say anymore. From now on, my life. If you don't know how to say them, then don't say anything." Hushi waved her hand at him and interrupted him. Soon, 2 silver needles quickly appeared on her wrist. The 2 silver needles slowly entered Gu Yulan's temple. Once the needles entered, Gu Yulan's struggling ceased. Although her body was still trembling from the pain, it became somewhat calmer. As Gu Lufeng watched the youth's act of inserting the needles, he didn't know why, but he suddenly remembered the scene of Shiyu decocting medicine in 100 herb mist with Nan Gongyu handing Shiyu medicine. that high-up king of hell was willing to lower himself and show modesty in front of Shiyu. At the time, Gu Lufeng accidentally saw the emotion in Nangong Yu's gaze when he looked at Shiyu. Shiyu was attentively looking at the medicinal stove. He didn't pay Nangong Yu a glance. But at the same time, Nangong Yu's gaze never left Shiyu's body. Such a tender, pampering, and dedicated gaze fooled people into believing that this wasn't the unfeeling king of hell. Rather, it was an indulging husband. Gu Lufeng sighed and quietly mumbled, "Perhaps Nangong Yu is the person most suited to you." Chapter 433 Big Question Notice. This is a double release. If you haven't read Chapter 432, make sure to do so. What did you say? Hushi was wholly immersed on Gu Yolan's body, and didn't clearly catch Gu Liufeng's quiet mumbling. She couldn't help but turn around and ask, "But why did her heart jump? Why did she think she just heard Nangong Yu's name?" Don't tell her it was because she hadn't seen that fellow in so long she was beginning to hallucinate. Pa. Even if she hadn't seen him in a long time, why would she have to make such a hallucination up? It wasn't like she liked that rascal. Hushi slapped her now reddened cheeks and returned her attention to her silver needles. She didn't even hear Gu Liufeng's quiet. It was nothing. But, thinking about it, she thought that Gu Lufeng just said some words because he was nervous about Gu Yolan's state. So she couldn't help but offer some comforting words. "Don't worry, nothing's wrong with your mother. I only needed her to sleep first." If not, her continuous shouting and struggling would quickly deplete her vitality, and that wouldn't be beneficial to the treatment later. And naturally, you can't use the common method for this sort of situation, otherwise, it'll also cause a bad effect on a sick person's mind. Suddenly, a smile appeared on Gu Liufeng's face. Although this smile was still somewhat bitter and weak, it already carried some traces of relief. "Little Yue, you're the genius doctor. When you decided to do something, I'll trust you. There's no need to explain something to me. If I can't even trust you, who can I trust?" Hushi laughed but didn't reply. After confirming that Gu Lufeng was calm again, she condensed a greenish-blue light that was about the size of a candle flame, and entered the space between Gu Yolan's eyebrows. This was Hushi's first time using her wood attribute, and because she normally wasn't able to train it much, using even just little bit caused her to develop a thin layer of sweat on her forehead. But compared to the water attribute, the wood attribute was truly the source of life. It could nourish all living things and reinstate sources. When it was used to treat an illness, it could be said that it produced twice the effect with half the amount of effort. As for the water attribute, although it had comforting and treatment effects, Hushi felt that it was most useful for examining a person's illness. Each time she used her water attribute to check a pulse, she was basically able to see the person's entire body state. No hole was left unentered. The shivers from pain on her body slowly faded away. Her tightly wrinkled together eyebrows loosened, and the corner of her mouth even had a shallow smile on it, as if she was an innocent child that was peacefully sleeping. Hushi felt her pulse again, and sure enough, it was much steadier than last times. In any case, her outbreak, this time, had passed. Hushi wiped the sweat off her face and turned around to look at Gu Lufeng. But she found that he was looking at her, as if he was looking at a monster. "What's wrong?" Gu Lufeng was sluggish for a while before he hoarsely said, "Little Yue, the attribute you were just using." "Attribute?" Hushi's face carried a doubtful expression. "Wood attribute, ah? Is there any problem? Wasn't it just the wood attribute, one of the 5 elements?" Why was Gu Lufeng so surprised? Gu Lufeng looked at Hushi's "Why are you making a fuss about nothing?" expression, and he stuttered. "It's a big problem. You said it was the wood attribute? If I didn't see wrongly, this wood attribute's spiritual power had an extremely pure essence, right?" "Yes, does the wood attribute's spiritual power have any problem?" Hushi's face showed impatience. "Spit it out." Gu Lufeng deeply sighed, and after being quiet for a while he finally said, "Then Little Yue, do you know or don't know that, in Miluo continent, martial artists having the wood attribute are extremely precious?" Although the 5 types of attributes found on Miluo continent were metal, wood, water, fire, and earth, martial artists who had the wood attribute were extremely rare. This wasn't just speaking about the martial artists who possessed the wood attribute of the heavenly spiritual roots, but it was also speaking of the martial artists with mixed wood attributes. They were all few in number. The most common attribute to wood was the wood attribute, which is a variation. When Gu Lufeng said these words, Hashi also realized. When she got her hands on all those cultivation methods, there were all types related to cultivating spiritual powers, but she didn't see any that were related to the wood attribute's spiritual power. Wood-attributed doctors could be said to be the precious treasure that every big sect or influential family would squabble for. And martial artists with the wood attribute would naturally have the ability to help the dying and injured. But their numbers are extremely sparse. As far as I know, in approximately 100 years, there has never been a martial artist with a pure wood attribute spiritual power that appeared on Miluo continent. Moreover, even if one had a mixed wood attribute, every major power would scramble for them. Most of all are the people from the Doctors Association. Reportedly, they have a poster up all year. As long as someone reports information regarding a martial artist with the wood attribute, they'll reward a large sum of money. But once these martial artists with the wood attribute have been taken away by the Doctors Association, nobody has heard from them since. Some say that they've become elders of the Doctors Association. Others say that they've already died. Listening to Gu Wei's words, Hashi rubbed her chin and had a pondering expression on her face. Gu Lufeng looked at her uncaring appearance and promptly said, "Little Yuer, you must not let your guard down at all. If you wish to have peaceful days in the future, you absolutely cannot let your ability to use the wood attribute be leaked out. Especially since I see that your wood attribute's essence is extremely pure. It must at least be that of a dual attribute spiritual roots. This sort of wood attributed martial artist would never be let off by the Doctors Association." Hashi faintly nodded and her eyes emitted a cold thread. Doctors Association? Rest assured, I know the appropriate behavior. If she let Gu Lufeng know that her wood attribute was actually the heavenly spiritual roots, presumably this fellow would become hopping mad. Once he confirmed that Hashi understood the weight of what he said, Gu Lufeng asked the state of his mother's condition. Hashi glanced at the serenely sleeping Gu Yulan before slowly saying, "Your mother doesn't have an illness, instead she's poisoned." Poisoned? Gu Lufeng was startled for a moment before his body emitted a burst of killing intent. Those people of Morong family really did poison Mother, right? But if it was poison, why would Mother's state improve after she took Morong family's medicine? Hashi didn't speak and took a jade slip out. Using her divine knowledge, she engraved something for a moment before throwing it towards Gu Lufeng. Gu Lufeng was flabbergasted at her actions. Using his mind to delve into the slip, he quickly saw a portrait inside it. Moreover, it was the portrait of a flower. This flower's branches were thin, its leaves were in the shape of a feather and ordinary. But the flower petals were enormous and bright red. From far away it filled one's eyes with its blood-red appearance. Hashi slowly said, "In my hometown, this flower is called a poppy. Here you guys grow it differently. Inside the flower, there is a dark attribute spiritual power, known as cold food flower. When the materials of this type of flower are used to refine pills, eating them won't cause someone to immediately die. They'll even become stimulated, floating about in desire, incomparably comfortable. Even their cultivation would momentarily have a boost. But if one excessively takes the medicine, they'll form an addiction. After becoming addicted, if they can't continue taking the pill, they'll feel even more pain than dying. Their entire person will seem to have gone insane, losing all reason." Chapter 435 Drug Addiction. Furthermore, when the person begins to take the medicine more and more, their addiction will grow stronger as well, until finally, their entire body had been used up by the pill. In the end, they'll lose their mind and die a violent death. Gu Lufeng tightly clenched the jade slip. The veins in the back of his hands bulged out. He was silent for a bit before hissing, "Morong family is a group of beasts. Why do they want to treat my mother like this? Why?" Hashi grimly laughed. "Since you've already said they're beasts, do they need any justification for doing despicable things?" Gu Lufeng took a deep breath and with great difficulty, he calmed himself down. He lowered his voice. "Little Yuer, you say? What do I have to do to help my mother? Hushi replied, because the time your mother has been addicted has been extremely long, the problems faced when giving up the drug addiction will be much bigger than imaginable. The most important thing of getting rid of an addiction is the addicted person's willpower. Wait a bit longer and your mother will slowly become conscious again. You need to speak to her more, give her the will and courage to continue living. In this way, it's possible to overcome the pain of detoxification. If not, it's very possible for her to lose her will to live and die during the detoxification. At once, Gu Lufeng nodded his head. You can be assured the most painful time has come. With great difficulty, we finally have hope. No matter how much more bitterness and hardship there is, I want to help her quit, so she can at least live the life of a normal person. Hushi nodded her head, then immediately pursued her eyebrows. There's another thing that you must pay attention to. Because your mother has had this addiction for so long, the period it takes to kick it will also be extremely long. During this time, you must never allow Morong family's people to come into contact with your mother, and you absolutely cannot let her touch even a drop of Morong family's pill. If not, if the drug addiction occurs, I'm afraid even the gods will be unable to help your mother. When Gu Lufeng heard her words, he grimly laughed and darkly marked, Little Yuer, you can be assured. If Morong family's people dare to come, I'll certainly pay them back 100-fold for all the suffering they've put my mother in over these years. So it's just right. Somewhat of a smiling expression made its way on Hushi's face. If you capture one of Morong family's people, remember to get a few of those pills they refined and give it to me to look at. Towards the medicines of this world, I'm very interested in them. As for your mother, you don't have to be too worried. Every time her poison breaks out, I'll be there to use my wood attribute to give her vitality, so it's not as hard for her to pass the outbreak. Chapter 436 Gift Shengdahal to her? Perhaps she should find an opportunity to look for the person regulating the drugs. To be able to create such a frightful drug, in this ancient world must require exceptional level in poisons. This piqued her interest. Over these several days, apart from cultivating and refining pills, she went to Shengdahal to forcibly make Gu Yulan kick her habit. Because Gu Yulan's addiction was extremely deep, it would flare up 3 or 4 times a day. So in the first few days, Hushi was practically always guarding by Gu Yulan's side, in order to prevent her flaring up at any time. Each time Gu Yulan flared up, she practically didn't even recognize her own family. One time, she even bit Gu Liufeng's arm, tearing a piece of flesh off. There was another time when she took advantage of Hushi and Gu Liufeng's neglectfulness, and knocked her head into the wall. In a short while, she had banged her head until it became badly bruised. At the same time, she was continuously yelling for them to let her die. The entire time, Gu Lufeng was firmly carrying her, letting her hit and tear at him. All the while he was softly calling out, Mother. His hand never released her. With spiritual power could maintain Gu Yulan's vitality, but it couldn't lessen her pain, nor could it help her keep her rationality when abstaining from the drugs. Under these types of circumstances, the one who suffered the most hardship and torment was Gu Lufeng. This persisted for approximately 7 days until Gu Yulan's symptoms finally improved. The poison breakouts went from 3 or 4 times every day to 1 time a day. But what caused Gu Lufeng to be the happiest was when Gu Yulan would vaguely open her eyes to look at him, and she would grab his hand and call out, Lufeng. The first time he heard his mother call out his name, Gu Lufeng couldn't help but let out a few scalding tears. This was the first time he heard his mother call his name out. When she was sober, over the 10 years they had been separate. At last, on the 8th day, Gu Lufeng suddenly pulled at the departing Shiyu's hand and smiled. Little Yuer, I'll never be able to repay you for the grace you gave us, this mother and son pair. I'll completely gift Shengdahal to you, okay? All of a sudden, Hushi blanked there. Gift Shengdahal to her? This was the foundation that Gu Lufeng spent 10 years to lay down. Had this fellow gone mad? She was just about to refuse when Gu Lufeng stopped her. First, you listen to me speak. I've already heard what your subordinate, Shi-san, has said. He frequently helps you sell medicinal ingredients and refined pills on the black market. Although business transactions are concealed on the black market, The income is greatly docked. Rather than sell them on the black market, it'd be better for you to open your own pharmacy and be the master. Gu Liufeng's words actually caused Hushi to feel emotionally affected. Not only because of the sale of the pills she refined, the most important are the medicinal herbs in her space. Nowadays, Dan Dan was very hardworking, but he had packed up most of the ancient rhyme spiritual field. Every day, he only took the spiritual plant, but it quickly filled the spirit firmament palace. Moreover, the time it took for spiritual plants to mature in the ancient rhyme field was short. It only took a few days for a batch to be ready for harvest. If she used them all to refine pills, she couldn't even finish using them by the time she died, and she could also forget about doing anything else. If she could have a medicinal hall that was considered her own, then she didn't have to be worried over the sale of those medicinal ingredients. An extraordinary splendor streaked through Hushi's eyes. She was just about to open her mouth and reply when Gu Lufeng seemed as if he understood what she wanted to say and immediately said, "Little Shuer, my saying that I'll gift Shengde Hall to you isn't because I want to put you in an advantageous situation. Instead, it's because our supply of goods for Shengde Hall has been completely cut off." "What do you mean?" Hushi thought back to the words of the little manservant from Ji Shenghal's words, and couldn't help but be flabbergasted. Murong Manor has such big ability that it can completely cut off your supply of goods. Chapter 437 Hearing of the Doctors Association. Again, this can't be If Murong family was able to accomplish this, then their medicinal hall wouldn't have been suppressed by Shengde Hall earlier. Gu Lufeng didn't speak before Zhou Yenan walked over to Hushi with his face full of worry. "It isn't only because of Murong family suppressing us. The main reason is because we offended Feng family and Feng Lianing in the secret territory. Shi Gongzi you don't know, but Feng Lianing is a part of the Doctors Association. Furthermore, her position isn't low either. No matter what medicinal hall it is, in Miluo continent, as long as the Doctors Association suppresses them, they won't be able to continue on." Zhou Yenan saw that Hushi had a puzzled expression on his face and he sighed. Because in Miluo continent, regardless of whether the spiritual medicine is good or if it's a standard pill, it's all related to the Doctors Association. If the Doctors Association issues an order to suppress us, we can't find any places to replenish our supply, nor can we find any doctors willing to work with us. Just relying on our few fields of spiritual plants and the rate I refine pills, we cannot keep even one Shengde Hall up and running. After all, Shengde Hall had branches. There wasn't only this one store in Yanjing City. And nowadays, they didn't even have enough pills and medicinal ingredients to keep the branch in Yanjing City up. This time, Hushi truly had a surprised expression on her face. Ever since she arrived on Miluo continent, she had always heard of the Doctors Association's name. She knew that this was an enormous organization, but she hadn't expected that this organization's strength was to this degree. How much power and military force was needed to be able to monopolize 80% of the mainland's market? On the contrary, at this moment, Gu Lufeng broke out into a laugh. "Little Yuer, do you understand my reasoning now? If I don't hand Shengde Hall to you, it won't even be 2 days before the foundation that I spent 10 years building up falls apart. Rather than so, it would be better for you to come take things over. I'm convinced that, on this Miluo continent, only you are able to contend against the Doctors Association." When Zhou Yenan heard what was said, he was filled with great alarm. However, he wasn't shocked at the fact that Gu Lufeng wished to gift Shengde Hall to Hushi. Gu Lufeng had told him that he would gift Shengde Hall to Hushi a few days prior. Now Zhou Yenan was very admiring of Hushi, and was even moved to tears by her. Where would he have any opposing thoughts? What he was shocked against was that Gu Lufeng said that Hushi could contend against the Doctors Association. Shi Gongzi is also an expert in refining pills. Zhou Yenan knit his brows. But even if we Shi Gongzi can refine pills, by only relying on us, we would only be able to refine 100 bottles with 1 or 2 pills each inside, each day. We would be extremely far off from the amount that is needed. Hushi didn't have time to speak before Shi-san, who had followed Hushi here, suddenly rushed up. From his bosom he brought out a piece of paper and mysteriously said, "What if our family's young? Hi one. Our family's Gongzi can produce 300 bottles of these quality pills each day? Zhou Yan'an suspiciously took the light yellow-colored paper and took a look. As it turns out, it was an appraisal for a pill from the Imperial Pharmaceutical Institution. But when Zhou Yan'an clearly saw the outcome of the appraisal on the document, he was overwhelmed with shock and voiced out. This can't be. How can the world have such a superb pill? He rubbed his eyes and took another glance. Then he shook his head and glanced again. But the appraisal was written in black and white. It was clear as day. The Imperial Pharmaceutical Institution's crest caused him to become dizzy. By the side, Shisan mischievously laughed. He looked down and appreciated Zhou Yan'an's "to hell with it" expression. Although he had originally been startled as well. Looking at others being intimidated by his own family's miss was truly too pleasurable. One hi-hi, sound of coughing. When he saw enough of Zhou Yan'an's joke, he finally walked forward. Don't look anymore. No matter how many times you look at it, the result will be the same. First-rate supplement spirit pill. The spiritual power of 10 crystals. The pill's essence purity is 99%. It's able to be taken long-term without limit. Such a short sentence. I saw it once and could recite it from memory. How long do you expect to look at it? Shopkeeper Zhou trembled and looked up. Holding up that piece of paper, he asked, Is this real? Shisan sneered. Don't you see Imperial Pharmaceutical Institution's crest on it? That has an attachment of spiritual power on it. Don't tell me you think I can fake it. Hey, requesting you not to look like you've never seen the world or are making a fuss of nothing. What do you say, if we only sell these pills in addition to various sorts of fresh spiritual medicines, will it be enough to support Shengde Hall? If there is this type of pill, of course it's possible. Zhou Yan'an's expression finally returned, his hands emotionally shook. How can this be top quality pills? It's the best pill. If any shop has just one bottle of this pill, it could be considered a treasure that could suppress shops. If we can sell this pill every day, in under a year, our Shengde Hall can push down every other medicinal hall in Yanjing City. But where is this type of high-quality supplement spirit pill found? Speaking up to here, Zhou Yan'an showed a yearning and dejected expression again. I dare to say that even Doctors' Association can't find a few people that can refine this pill? Shisan rubbed his ears and let out an "are you a fool" expression, unhappily saying, I say, shopkeeper Zhou, did you even hear what I just said? I already said that this pill has been refined by my family's Gongzi. Furthermore, every day she can make 300 or 400 pill bottles, and this is only the product of half a day's work. It was clear that the person, Zhou Yan'an, in front of him was at gold core stage, and that he was only at foundation establishment stage. But ever since he began to follow his family's miss, Shisan always felt as if he could raise his head and straighten his chest in front of anyone when speaking. Didn't it seem that even the vice president of the Imperial Pharmaceutical Institution was respectful in front of him? When the head of the black market came to ask if he could sell more pills, wasn't his tone sincere and fervent? Hey, this feeling is really too pleasurable. Oh my God. Zhou Yan'an let out a cry. Filled with disbelief, he looked towards Hushi. Even his breathing had halted. Shigongzi Yuan, you can really refine such a high-quality supplement spirit pill? Hey, you still don't trust? Shisan casted a glance at Zhou Yan'an and fished a small porcelain bottle out from his bosom. Look, I still have a bottle that master refined. Give it a try and you'll know. Although most of Hushi's pills had been sold on the borderless black market, in order to guard against the unexpected, and in the case that B Courtyard's people needed to use it, Shisan still had some pills left over. There wasn't enough to sell, but if it was used to give to Zhou Yan'an, there was an abundant amount of them. Zhou Yan'an took the pill out and sniffed it. Then he took a look and suddenly raised his head to look at Shisan with a burning gaze. Shisan had turned blank from his stare. What is this pill fake? I remember. Zhou Yan'an's voice suddenly raised. Aren't you the Sanzi that caused an uproar earlier? About a month before, news suddenly came out in the medical world that high-quality pills had appeared. It caused every influential family and large sect to come looking at every medicinal hall. In particular was the Imperial Pharmaceutical Institution, who posted an announcement searching for a low-rank martial artist called Sanzi. But no matter how much everyone searched, there wasn't any trace of Sanzi that could be found. Later on, the matter was just left unsettled. When he's saying you, he's formally saying it. It's just that this situation was rumored. As a second-rank doctor, Zhou Yan'an had heard some of it. Originally, he thought that this Sanzi had long already been taken away by the Doctors' Association. He didn't expect that the person who refined the pills was actually Shi Gongzi, and the rumored CZ was Shi Gongzi's butler, Shi San. However, Zhou Yan'an didn't follow the black market much. So he didn't know that Shi San had raised up such a storm in the black market with this high-quality pill, much higher of a storm than the one raised in Yanjing City. During the time that Shi San was selling the supplement spirit pills on the borderless black market, he also used the name Sanzi. And to avoid inconvenience, he gave the pills the name Nameless Supplement Spirit Pills. Later, when the supplement spirit pills became extremely popular, Shi San started running out of the goods on hand. This led to chickens flying and dogs jumping, one in the black market. During those days, every day, the communication space was flooded with people asking where they could buy nameless supplement spirit pills. So much so that some people even ran to the Mercenary Association to hire people, wanting to find out this Sanzi's real identity. Nowadays, the mysterious master that refined the high-quality nameless supplement spirit pills had long since become widespread throughout the entire Miluo continent. When Shi San heard Zhou Yan'an's words, his face was full of pride. Laughing, he replied, "You're considered clever. When I went to the Imperial Pharmaceutical Institution to get the pill appraised, I actually changed my appearance. Later, when the appraisal was done, that group of people encircled me, not letting me leave. They insisted that I say who refined the pill. Fortunately, I was clever. I pretended to be drunk and went to the toilet, then I secretly ran away. No matter how much they turned Yanjing City upside down, they couldn't find me." Zhou Yan'an admiringly looked at the pill in his hand again, before handing it back to Shi San. But Shi San didn't accept it. He looked at Hushi, and when he received her approval, he immediately waved his hand. "It's nothing more than one bottle of supplement spirit pills. In the future, our Shengda Hall will have so much, what's the point of giving it to me? You can just take it and eat it like candy." In a few days, when Gongzi has finished preparing the pills, our Shengda Hall can reopen for business. We should also find some staff and so on. Would it be better if we go to the side and consult now? Having received the high-quality supplement spirit pill from Shi San, Zhou Yan'an was grinning from ear to ear. He didn't care at all that Shi San, was nothing more than at Qi refining stage. Following him, he ran over to the side to discuss Shengda Hall's reopening. In Shi San's eyes, Shengda Hall was his family's miss. The money earned was all miss. Naturally, he must properly plan. Seeing the two people laughing as they walked further away, Hushi's face also had a bit of a smiling expression on it. Standing beside her, Gu Lufeng saw her shallowly smile and suddenly started speaking. "Shiyu, do you care if another person accompanies you?" Flabbergasted, Hushi turned to him. She didn't understand what he meant. Gu Liufeng's face didn't have a mask on. His peach blossom eyes were gleaming. If he didn't have that martial artist scar, he would be even prettier than the peach blossoms. Especially now that his forehead no longer had that gloominess. All that was left over was peace and purity. "Shiyu, I believe that you have the aptitude to stand at the summit of this world. You also have the strength and a temperament that's better than any other person. Nowadays, I, Gu Lufeng, am all alone in this world. The only thing I have is this little bit of cultivation and in wisdom. I'm barely enough to assist you. I want to bet that you, Shiyu, will win success and recognition one day. Bet that you will one day stand at the top, accepting everyone's hopes. And I hope that during that time, I can stand behind you and look at your radiance. One chickens flying and dogs jumping chaos." "Shiyu, do you accept me this friend following you?" Gu Liufeng's words were very serious, to the extent that Hushi momentarily didn't know how to respond. Thousands of thoughts swirled around in her heart. She thought about refusing, she thought of hesitating, and thought about asking. But towards the end, Gu Liufeng's words moved her. Gu Lufeng said there would be a day where she would stand at the top of all martial artists. That's right, that was her goal all along. To become strong, so that nobody could suppress her anymore, restrict her. Thinking about it, why couldn't she accept Gu Lufeng following her? Why couldn't she create her own kingdom? Thinking to her, Hushi suddenly let out a brilliant smile. Underneath this smiling expression, the originally cold and elegant youth suddenly became peerless. The rays of lights were brilliantly bright, nearly causing people to be incapable of looking straight at her. Okay, Gu Lufeng. Looking straight at Gu Liufeng's eyes, she said one word at a time. I, Nalan Hushi, pledge that I regard you as a brother, as a close friend in this life. If there's betrayal, heaven and earth won't allow it. There will be a day where I'll bring you to the peak of the world, taking the world's magnificent scenery into our eyes. You can be assured, I won't let you regret betting. Gu Lufeng repeatedly nodded his head. His eyes were blazing and clear. They were no longer hesitant and wavering. But after approximately the time it took to burn a stick of incense after Hushi left Shengda Hall, Gu Liufeng's expression finally returned. Rung. Just then, when Shiyu pledged. What did he say he was called? Nalan Hushi. After Hushi returned to be courtyard, she didn't tarry and immediately entered her space, beginning to refine pills. In fact, the high-quality pills she could refine weren't only limited to supplement spirit pills. But supplement spirit pills were the ones she was most familiar with refining. Just like Shi-san said, she could casually refine for half a day and make approximately 300 or 400 pills. But these were just words. Refining pills was actually extremely costly in mind and spiritual power. Each time a stove of pills were refined, she would accumulate sweat from head to foot. But collapsing wasn't possible. Although this sort of spiritual weariness broadened her meridians and was good towards her cultivation, even an immortal couldn't experience this type of exhaustion day after day. If she could find a way to produce the pills in large batches, that would be good. Just like the pharmaceutical companies did in her previous life. But Hushi could only dream of such a thought. If she could really produce the pills in batches, then she didn't need to work in the second half of her life. All she would do would be waiting for the heavens to smash a crystal rock down. Just as she entered her space, she heard Dan Dan's melodious laugh. All she saw was the little fellow sitting on the swing woven by the purple vine. Dan Dan flashed back and forth, joyfully playing. The purple abyss vine was the most pampering towards this little fellow. Using its vine to build a swing for this fellow was a testament on its own. And from time to time, the vine even used its leaves to wipe the sweat off of its face. When the purple vine swept across its skin, it tickled Dan Dan, causing it to incessantly laugh out. As for the little golden dragon, nowadays it sat motionless in the spiritual spring water. The radiance of its gold scales were bright and dark. From the two's mind connection, she was able to deduct that this fellow was going to be promoted soon. What cultivation speed was this? Hushi was rendered speechless. Hadn't this fellow already ascended a rank after eating the divine dragon fruit? Why was he being promoted again after just a short month? The rank of dragons and martial artists were different. Adding on to that was that this golden dragon had formerly passed through calamity and went heavenwards. So its currently promotion speed was quick, but this type of speed was truly too excessive. When Dan Dan saw Hushi, it brought the swing higher and higher. Then it flew and threw itself into her arms, laughing all along. Mother, it's time for the evening meal. Are you going to prepare delicious food for Dan Dan? Hushi carried the heavy little fellow and poked its head, unhappily replying, You little chowhound. All day, all you know how to do is eat. As if I've starved you. You say, I stored food in the spirit firmament palace. Who was it that ate it clean? It was long. Dan Dan covered its mouth. Its eyes were randomly turning looking around. Hushi slapped it a few times on the forehead. Not only do you steal food, you've also learned how to lie. I clearly put it in a secret place, but you rummaged through and found it, eating it all clean. Be careful, in the future you might eat so much you'll turn into a fatty. Ugly and fat, nobody will want you. Dan Dan isn't ugly or fat. When Dan Dan heard Hushi scolding it, it immediately began to sob. The other person one has clearly been working. Every day they plant many spiritual plants and even bring them back, neatly piling them up. Woo woo woo, mother doesn't love me anymore. Mother avoids me because I'm ugly. Okay. Is it not okay for me to be wrong? When Dan Dan started crying, Hushi immediately became flustered. She was usually grim, but when she came in front of this little fellow's face, it had her wrapped around its finger, she became soft. Hushi wiped the tears from Dan Dan's face and patiently comforted it. It was mother that was wrong. Dan Dan is obedient and very adorable. Dan Dan made the spiritual field full of plants and even brings them back. Dan Dan is the most useful. It was mother that spoke incorrectly then. Dan Dan, don't feel sad, okay? With great difficulty, Dan Dan nodded its head. Wrapping itself around Hushi's neck, it childishly said, "Then mother, you have to forever love Dan Dan? Even if you love daddy, it can't surpass Dan Dan. Oh. And in the future, the little babies can't surpass Dan Dan either. Daddy? Little babies? What the hell? How many melodramatic dramas did this little fellow watch at 8? 2. Hushi lowly coughed and rubbed the antennae on its head. Then she helplessly said, "Okay, I got it. Mother will forever love you the most. Are you happy now, brat?" Dan Dan, whose antennae had been touched, had a red face. Mischievously laughing, he jumped down from Hushi's embrace and vivaciously ran back onto the purple vine swing. Its face still had tear stains, but it's had a brilliant smiling expression, similar to sunshine. Really has the temperament of a child. If one said it was wind, then it was rain. 3. When Hushi saw Dan Dan happily playing, she didn't mind it anymore. Arriving at Spirit Firmament Hall, she took out the Zijin medicine cauldron. First, she refined 2 furnaces of supplement spirit pill. After spending approximately 2 hours, both furnaces had been completely refined and each furnace had about 100 pills. Compared to when she first refined pills, the speed was truly quicker. Perhaps it was related to the fact that she used the Zijin medicine cauldron to refine, but each of the supplement spirit pills she refined this time had the crystal power equal to 12 crystals. These pills had become a 3rd-rank supplement spirit pill. Hushi took out the overflowing cauldron pill scripture and chose 2 types of rank 2 pills to refine from it. After an hour, the rank 2 pills were taken out of the oven. There was 92 pills. Their colors were all vivid and their spiritual chi was rich. Hushi was overjoyed. When she refined rank 2 pills now, she didn't have the feeling of having to toil anymore. Continuing on, Hushi refined several stoves of 1st-rank supplement spirit pills in one stretch. After all, her first-rate supplement spirit pills had already caused such a great fuss. If she took out rank 2 supplement spirit pills, she couldn't guarantee that it wouldn't attract the Doctors Association's longing. The other person. Dan Dan's referring to itself too. How many melodramatic dramas did this little fellow watch at 8? 8 o'clock is like the golden time. Around this time is typically when people have finished eating dinner and are spending time with family by watching television. Usually around this time, there are a lot of dramas on, especially melodramatic ones. 3. If one said it was wind, then it was rain. She's basically saying that Dan Dan doesn't dwell on much. Between different events there isn't much of a gap for him. Chapter 442. The most intelligent spirit pet. By the time the 5th stove of 1st-rank supplement spirit pills had finished, Hushi had already accumulated a body full of sweat. Her spiritual power had been completely dried up, and she was only able to continue up to now because she had used her 9th secluded spring water to replenish her spiritual power. Looking at the 10 or so porcelain bottles full of pills, Hushi felt immensely gratified, yet worried. If she had to refine pills every day, regardless of the time, for Shengda Hall, how would she have any time to cultivate? Mother, do you want these black sweets? Dan Dan made them entirely for you. Hushi turned around and saw the small fellow grasping a small case full of black pills. It was presenting it in front of her, as if it were presenting a treasure. The little fellow's forehead had some sweat, and its big eyes were glistening. The 2 antennae on its head swayed and the expression on his face said, "Mother, I'm obedient. Quickly come and praise me." These were pills? Hushi picked one up and tasted it, discovering that these were indeed first-rank supplement spirit pills. Moreover, no matter how strong the spiritual chi it seemed to have, it was nearly the same amount that the pills she refined had. Hushi swallowed the pill, and felt the feeling of the pill dissolving for a moment. Although it couldn't achieve the crystal power of 12 crystals, it contained the power of approximately 8 crystal powers. The essence purity was also about 80%. This quality of pill was already comparable to the top first-rank supplement spirit pill on the market. It could even be said to be a rank above. Hushi looked at Dan's box, which she had no clue where it came from, with astonishment. How come she saw 1,000 pills? Dan, where did you get these pills from? Dan stuck out his small chest and mischievously laughed. Naturally, it was because I refined them. Ah, Mother, I'm awesome, right? Hushi opened and closed her mouth for a while. After some time, she was finally able to force some words out. Dan, how long have you been refining these pills? How long? Dan didn't know either. Ah? Dan tilted his little head and seriously thought. Because when Dan threw the spiritual medicines into the stove, Dan also threw them in. When Mother lit the fire, Dan also lit the fire. When Mother opened the stove, Dan also did so. The result was this many pills, one stove. It was only the time it took one stove. Unexpectedly, Dan was able to refine 1,000 top-notch, first-rank supplement spirit pills, from one stove. Hushi simply didn't know how to describe her current mood. When Dan saw Hushi didn't praise it and instead was expressionless, its antennae suddenly drooped down, and it began to sob. Mother, was it Dan who made an error? Dan was just bored and imitated Mother refining pills. Originally, Dan was playing on the swing, but he later got bored of playing and ran to Hushi's side to watch. But Hushi was busy with refining and didn't notice the little fellow, nor did she play with it. Dan was truly bored and hated to depart from Hushi's side, so it began to refine with her. Dan had just finished speaking when Hushi carried it and repeatedly kissed its face. Our family's Dan is truly the most intelligent spirit pet in the whole world. Dan, you didn't make an error. Instead, you helped resolve a big problem for Mother. At first, when Dan had been kissed, it was distracted. Following that, it covered its face and laughed. Because it was both shy and happy, its entire body had a light pink color on it. Looking at it, it looked exceptionally delicious, causing one to want to swallow it. Hushi carried Dan and praised it for a moment, before having some baffling questions. Dan, you know how to refine pills? And you have a stove? Dan pulled Hushi to a distant place and pointed at a gray stove. I found it from a corner. Mother threw it in the corner and nobody was using it, so I took it and used it. Chapter 443 Mass Refining. Hushi looked at the stove in front of her and felt that it looked familiar, but temporarily, she couldn't recall where she had seen it. Dan waved his claw and the stove turned into an unremarkable gray cauldron and flew in front of Hushi. In this moment, Hushi finally recognized it. Wasn't this the stove that she had robbed from Zhu Pongzi? But at the time, she didn't know how to refine pills. So, it had no use for her, and she threw it to the side. Now it seemed like this cauldron had extremely profound carvings on it. It seemed like it was an extraordinary item that didn't belong to Zijin medicine cauldron. Hushi tried to pour some spiritual power into the cauldron, and it instantly turned big. The carvings on it flashed with bright lights, and it seemed as if the cauldron didn't wait for the spiritual fire to enter it before it started absorbing spiritual power from the earth and sky. Hushi took out the overflowing cauldron pill scripture and let Dan have a look. Dan, can you follow the description here and refine a pill? Dan looked at the prescription, fire movement, spiritual power, and materials needed. His two big eyes spun. Mother, what is this, Dan can't make sense of it. Hushi said. Her voice was laced with astonishment. You can't make sense of this? Then how did you refine pills? I learned by following Mother, Dan spoke like the answer was obvious. Whatever Mother puts, Dan also puts. Then how did you know how to turn the spiritual power and how strong the spiritual fire should be? Mother is slow. Dan mischievously laughed. Dan Dan can see the spiritual power on Mother's body when it revolves. Ah. Dan Dan also knows the color and depth of the spiritual fire. Naturally Dan Dan can follow Mother and refine. Saying this, Dan Dan patted himself with his claw and began to twirl around Hushi. When Mother is refining pills, you are the prettiest then. Your body shines and Dan Dan loves to look at Mother the most. Hushi didn't pay attention to this little bootlicker and prepared some spiritual grasses for a second-rank pill, letting Dan Dan watch her refine. Dan Dan watched Hushi as she refined and immediately waved his claw. The medicinal herbs from Spirit Firmament Palace appeared in front of its face. But what made it different from Hushi's was that the amount of medicinal herbs that Dan Dan had was far more than Hushi's. At the least, it was 10 times more than Hushi's. With this amount of herbs, if Hushi was to refine them, then she would quickly run out of spiritual force and fail to refine pills. But to Dan Dan, it seemed as if it didn't have these worries. Moreover, Hushi was filled with shock when she found out that Dan Dan's spiritual fire wasn't red, like normal. Instead, it was a green color. And approximately 1 hour later, and the pills were finished being refined, the ash cauldron opened and inside, there was 800 or 900 second-ranked pills. Although each pill's quality couldn't be compared to the ones she refined, it reached the same level as the top pill on the market. Hushi looked at the pill for a while before she asked Dan Dan, with great difficulty, Dan Dan, how many pills can you refine at once? You won't feel strained? Dan Dan took its own second-ranked pill and stuffed it in its mouth. Biting it, it looked at the newly refined second-ranked pills and said, after refining, there's some tiredness. But after drinking some spring water, it should be okay. This? Dan Dan pointed at the first-rank supplement spirit pill. Dan Dan can refine a lot of these and won't feel tired at all. Ah. Hushi choked on her saliva, and suddenly felt distracted. Just then she had been fantasizing about being able to produce the pills in batches. Now her family's Dan Dan has made her dream come true. Chapter 444. Is he still okay? Hushi carried Dan Dan in her arms and intimately said to it, Dan Dan, in the future, can you help Mother refine a few stoves full of first-rank pills and another stove of second-rank pills? Dan Dan opened his claws and counted. If it was to refine a few stoves of first-rank pills every day, it could just throw medicinal herbs in there, and after 2 hours, be done with it. It didn't even have to feel tired. And one stove of second-rank pills would also only take 2 hours. And it wouldn't interfere with its time to play. However, Dan Dan still felt as if it needed to fight for its rights. Then every day, Mother has to make lots of yummy foods for me. Little rascal, you've also learned how to haggle. Hushi laughed and poked its little head. When have I slighted you in regards to giving you food? Okay, to reward you for being so awesome, today Mother will make some fresh food for you. Oh, Mother is the best. Dan Dan cheered. After giving Hushi a kiss, it jumped out of her embrace and obediently ran over to the side to begin refining. When Dan Dan did that, Hushi began to cook food. Ever since they returned from Sealed Dragon Domain's secret territory, she realized that she had never properly cooked. In particular, there were some ingredients that she received from Sealed Dragon Domain's secret territory, which caused even her to drool with desire. Hushi waved her finger and golden python meat and Rockwing appeared in front of her. Hushi looked at the rock and her expression suddenly turned absent-minded. In front of her appeared the scene of that person standing in front of her, facing off against the crowd whilst giving her that dazzling smile. She was very clearly injured, but they still closely protected her. In her ears, she seemed to have heard that person's low and hoarse voice, which carried that magnetic sound. Sheer, are you willing to marry me? Nangongyu. How long has it been since she had seen that fellow? Was he still okay? He hadn't appeared for so long. Did the cold poison on his body not flare up? He didn't have any pain? Annoyed, Hushi shook her head. She was indulging in fantasies. How that fellow was doing didn't have any relationship with her. But deep in her heart, she seemed to have something that was uncontrollable change. She had never felt this feeling before. It caused her to feel flustered and lose control over her own emotions and train of thought. Shaking off the thoughts of that person from her mind, Hushi began to deal with the golden python. But subconsciously, she decided to leave the rock behind. When Nangongyu came back, she would cook it in front of him and let him have a taste. So he could finally decide whether or not rock meat was incapable of entering the mouth. After an hour passed, Dan Dan finished refining pills and ran over to Hushi's side. It saw the delicious and fragrant food in front of it, and began to salivate, creating a puddle of its own saliva on the floor. Most of all were the golden python-related dishes. Golden snake roe, jadeite snake soup, secret recipe snake meat. It was all so delicious, Dan Dan had a hard time swallowing his own saliva. And at this moment, the little dragon also finished cultivating. Or rather, it smelt the delicious fragrance of something that shook his heart and soul. It couldn't control its thoughts of wanting to come out and taste what it was. And in the blink of an eye, it really seemed to have broke through to 5th rank. By the time it flew over and snatched a piece of golden snake roe from Dan Dan's claws, it began to salivate. Together with Dan Dan, they both ate through all the food. One had to understand that Hushi's magic beast foods weren't only good, they also maintained all of the magic beast's spiritual power. Rather than losing spiritual power, it was the impurities within the magic beast that all get driven away by the spiritual fire. In the past, the little dragon only ate beast meat in order to survive, and in order to absorb all of the spiritual power from the meat. It didn't enjoy the fishy odor that the meat seemed to carry. Now, after discovering that the food Hushi made was not only delicious but rich in spiritual power, its heart suddenly burst with joy. It hugged Hushi's thigh and loudly shouting, proclaiming that it would no longer eat raw meat, and would only eat the meat that Hushi prepared. Ignoring the two fellows boasting and fighting, Hushi ate some of the snake meat, and then left the space. After coming out, she jumped to the top of Tsang Mountain. In the midst of the lush forest that resided at the top of Tsang Mountain, Hushi specially made a way for a portion of the spiritual force from Sealed Dragon Domain to go into Tsang Mountain. And at this very moment, Wu Xian was coincidentally cultivating at the top of the mountain. Originally, Wu Xian wished to follow behind Hushi in order to protect her. However, he was rejected by Hushi based on the reason that having a nascent soul stage martial artist following her would be too eye-catching. However, after Wu Xian had been chased to this place by Hushi with a heavy heart, he realized that his family's Wang Fei had only done so because she knew that his had just been promoted to nascent soul stage and was still unstable. So she had found a place that was undisturbed, remote and rich with spiritual qi for him to cultivate. Originally, Wu Xian wanted to decline her. But when Hushi told him that it was a command, he didn't dare to speak back anymore. Most of all, after he sent a letter to Master, Master approved of Wang Fei's decision. So Wu Xian settled down here without worries. Now after a brief month passed, his current state stabilized into a true nascent soul stage, not like the previous fake nascent soul stage he was in. At this moment, Wu Xian had just reached the tip of the 6th branch of the method that Master had sent, when he felt someone approaching. When he clearly saw Hushi's figure, Wu Xian's face immediately turned respectful as he walked forward to welcome her. Wang Fei, why have you come? Hushi had made a loop around, inspecting everything. After she felt the rich spiritual qi in the area, she nodded her head. How do you feel now? Thanking Wang Fei for allowing this precious cultivation. Wu Xian gratefully thanked. Subordinate's current cultivation state has steadied now. If Wang Fei had any commands, subordinate will definitely be able to accomplish them. For Hushi to have found such a remote and spiritual qi-rich place for him to cultivate, Wu Xian had already harbored suspicions. But Master's reassurances dispelled any doubts Wu Xian had. In any case, Wang Fei was extremely strong, had many cards in her hand, and was able to protect herself. This was all advantageous towards Master. May I ask if Wang Fei has any matters for subordinate to do? When Wu Xian saw that Hushi hadn't responded for a while, he couldn't help but ask a second time. Hushi muttered to herself under her breath, while her face held an embarrassed expression. But suddenly, she threw a storage ring to Wu Xian and instructed, "The things inside this are remains of what I made too much. It's for you guys." Once she finished speaking, she didn't wait for Wu Xian to reply before she jumped into the air and instantly disappeared. Wu Xian blankly stood there for a long time. Why did he feel that Wang Fei's back always had the scent of fleeing? After a while, Wu Xian finally returned back to normal and used his mind to probe around the storage ring, bringing the contents outside. Soon after, a reddish-brown food box appeared in front of his eyes, and the strong smell of food filled his nose. Wu Xian momentarily blanked out. Moreover, it wasn't just one food box inside this storage ring. It was actually two instead. Wu Xian thought for a moment before he went back to smell it again. This was what Wang Fei prepared for Master? Oh, wrong. There were two food boxes. So was it that one of them was for himself? So if he ate one, there wouldn't be any problems? A few days later, a certain person, residing in the Magic Beast Forest, received a storage ring that contained a food box. When he smelt the familiar fragrance coming off of the food box in spirals, Nangong Yu buried his face in his hands and didn't budge for a long time. Chapter 446 Limited amounts to purchase. Later that same day, the sun was slowly setting on the horizon as Qing Long watched, with amusement, as his master put a reddish-brown food box by his bedside. Then he sat cross-legged in meditation. Occasionally, he would open his eyes and gently caress the box. He carried a tender expression on his face that seemed to be deeply ingrained. If Qing Long didn't clearly see that it was a food box in front of Master, he would have thought that the food box was actually a beautiful woman instead. Over the following few days, Hushi was in seclusion in her space. She spent her time refining pills and practicing her Mahao inheritance. And as for the pills she refined, she usually handed them over to Shi-san. From there, Shi-san would directly bring them to Shengda Hall to sell them. Before Shi-san received any pills, he already knew that Miss could refine a numerous amount of pills in one day. But when he actually saw 1,000 first-ranked pills and 100 second-ranked pills, he turned speechless with shock. Although this batch of several thousand pills only had 200 or 300 pills that were first-rate supplement spirit pills, the remaining ones were still at the level of a high-quality supplement spirit pill. This was only the product of a day's work. His family's miss really defied the heavens. After 7 days passed, Hushi remembered that Gu Liufeng's mother would soon be entering a critical point of her withdrawal symptoms. After considering for a moment, she decided that it was still best for her to go assist her using her with spiritual power. So she began to prepare to go to Shengda Hall to have a look. However, by the time Hushi arrived on Yanjing City's eastern street, she was frightened by the dense crowd of people that filled the street. Correct, it was clearly just 7 in the morning, but Yanjing City's eastern street was already packed full of people. Moreover, these people weren't strolling around the street shopping. Instead, they were all motionless, seeming to be waiting in line, blocking a certain place. A moment later, Hushi finally realized that these people were blocking the entrance of Shengda Hall. What was going on here? Previously, the entrance to Shengda Hall was completely deserted. How come it was now surrounded by an impenetrable crowd of people? But what confused Hushi the most was the fact that she saw people belonging to influential families, and even the imperial family in the line. Their clothes were appropriate for their rank, and they stood at the very front of the line. On ordinary days, these people acted extremely arrogant. However, now they all obediently stood in line at the entrance, waiting for Shengda Hall to open for the day. Hushi walked a bit closer, and suddenly began to hear the sounds of people whispering to each other. How come it still hasn't opened? I've already waited the whole night. What is just one night worth? I arrived yesterday afternoon, and I've been waiting here since. What do you think is up with Shengda Hall? Do you think they aren't selling anymore? Impossible. Yesterday I heard shopkeeper Zhou say, with my own ears, that Shengda Hall would be selling these first-rate pills every single day. But I heard that these pills are very time-consuming to refine, so there are limited amounts to purchase. Limited amounts to purchase? What's the limit? In front of us, there are so many people. Will the line ever get to us? The people in the line suddenly cried out in grief. Most of all was the fact that the people at the front of the line were all from influential families. By the time they finished buying what they wanted, there wouldn't be any pills left for them. The person previously speaking heaved a sigh. What can be done? This is someone else's Shengda Hall, and the pills are their own. However many they wish to buy is however many they will buy. And if they don't buy, you still don't have any means. But even if we can't buy top-quality supplement spirit pills, Shengda Hall sells other first-rate pills. The quality of those pills are better than the ones that other medicinal halls sell. I'm scared that I won't even be able to buy those. Another person followed up with a voice laced with excitement. That's true. A few days before, my D1 fought for a bottle of Shengda Hall's first-rank supplement spirit pill. According to him, the crystal's power and purity in this pill is even better than the first-ranked pills that other shops sell. So don't even mention first-rate supplement spirit pills. One D, younger junior disciple. You say that the first-rate supplement spirit pill's essence purity reaches up to 99%? I heard that even the elders of the Doctors Association can only refine pills with an essence as pure as 85%. Shengda Hall isn't trying to cheat me, right? It's definitely true. This was directly from the Imperial Pharmaceutical Institution's appraisal. According to rumor, they set a contract with them on the same day. So you're saying that I can take this pill and cultivate up to Meridian stage without having to worry about the poison in the pills accumulating in my body? Hey, who do you say has been refining these first-rate supplement spirit pills? Has anyone else on this continent successfully refined them before? I haven't heard of anyone being able to refine them. But if they're able to refine them to this level, then they have to, at least, be at the level of a great scholar, right? This group of people's guesses quickly led to an uproar. A great scholar level in refining pills, and the highest-ranked doctor in Jinling country. The only person it could be was Nalan Jingza. To these people, such an expert at refining pills was just as distant as a character from a legend. Why would this type of person be refining pills for Shengda Hall? What type of background does Shengda Hall have? And weren't they unable to obtain any pills before, and about to go bankrupt? None of you guys know? The person who broke the news at the start suddenly cried out in surprise. A few days ago, Shengda Hall exchanged owners. Moreover, it's said that this new owner is quite competent. All these pills were brought in by the new owner. Moreover, Shengda Hall is currently only selling first-ranked supplement spirit pills. Reportedly, they have second-ranked pills on hand, and even third-ranked ones too. If one was able to buy even one pill, cuckoo. The back of the line was spiritedly discussing these things until finally, someone from the front couldn't help but come over and say, "You don't know this? Shengda Hall doesn't just sell supplement spirit pills, they sell an even more powerful and precious pill. It's known as Easing Meridian's pill." Easing Meridian's pill? What is that? It's a type of pill that has never been seen before on Miluo continent. It's used to widen the meridian channels of low-level martial artists. Once everyone heard what was said, everyone immediately exploded. Is this real or fake? The meridian channels of martial artists is decided by the heavens. The only way they can gradually be widened is by advancing in rank. Even Morong family's cold food pill can only cause people to promote in cultivation levels. We've never heard of a pill that could widen martial artists' meridian channels. When the group of people at the front saw everyone's astonished expressions, they felt even more proud of themselves for already having known, and laughed. Of course it's true. The first few days they opened for business, the people of influential families and the royal family hadn't found out about the pill yet. I was fortunate enough to be able to buy a pill. Originally, I only took it to give it a try, and the result was that after it widened my meridian channels, I also felt that my cultivation went up quite a bit. Not only this, but I also feel like my spiritual force revolves much faster now. Moreover, this pill isn't like Morong family's cold food pill, where you receive a boost for a little while and it fades away after a bit. I've been taking Easing Meridian's pill every single day, up until today, and my cultivation has been steadily upgrading. Easing Meridian's pill is much better than cold food pill. Once he said these words, everyone surrounded him suddenly shot envious or admiring looks towards him. This caused the smile on his face to grow even wider with pride. When Hushi heard their words, she secretly said in her heart, she truly did refine a stove full of these first-ranked pills. However, she hadn't given them a name before handing them over to Shi-san. It looks like the fellow gave them the name, Easing Meridian's Pill. Although it wasn't extremely pleasant to hear, it was a much better name than the name that Shijia and the others, that group of unsophisticated people, gave the pill, which was Hercules' pill. Hashi felt that Shi-san really had the gift of naming things. Was Morong family's cold food pill the same one she heard Guyulan talking about? Morong family was actually selling these pills in batches. Those men spiritedly discussing all seemed to be between 30 and 40 years old. The lowest in cultivation among them was at the beginning stage of foundation establishment stage, while the highest was at the summit of foundation establishment stage. Each of their clothes were different, indicating that they were all from different sections. However, this didn't seem to affect their conversation much. But their conversation halted when they noticed Hashi walking closer to them. They saw that her lips were red, her teeth were white. She was still young, and she was at foundation establishment stage. One of the men in the group stood out. His face had a full beard, and he couldn't help but yell, "Little Xiongdi, do you want to buy pills too?" Hashi's expression remained indifferent, and she didn't say anything in response. The group of people thought that her silence was her tactically agreeing, so they couldn't help but burst out into laughter. "Xiongdi, you've arrived so late. Don't even dream about getting a best quality pill. You may not even be able to get a top quality one." Hashi's eyebrow raised in response. "Is there always this many people in line here?" "Of course there is." Another person responded to her at once. "If you don't come extremely early to line up, then forget about buying any pills. You may not even be able to touch a spiritual herb. After all, the spiritual herbs that Shengda Hall sells have much more spiritual qi than the ones that other stores sell." Following those words, the man with the beard nodded his head. "Moreover, even if we do line up like this, we can't compare to the imperial family and influential families, ah." He pointed at the people lined up at the very front and heaved a sigh, clicking his tongue. "The only time we stood a chance was during the first few days, when everyone still didn't know. Lately, all of Shengda Hall's best quality pills have practically all been taken by influential families. If we were able to buy even one top quality pill, we would already be happy." When she saw this unusually lively scene, Hashi put down her heart. It looks like she didn't need to worry about how to sell the pills that she and Dan made. "Little Xiongdi, how about you wait with us for a bit? If I buy a lot of pills, then I'll evenly distribute some with you." Hashi waved her hands, refusing their good intentions. She turned around and flashed over to Shengda Hall's back door. In one jump, she landed on the second floor. Once Hashi reached Shengda Hall's second floor, she saw Gu Lufeng, Shi-san and shopkeeper Zhou all congregating here. Shi-san and shopkeeper Zhou huddled together. In one moment, they looked excited, and in another, they looked anxious. She didn't know what they were discussing to elicit such reactions from them. Gu Lufeng sat on the bed, by an unconscious Gu Yulan. His expression was calm and gentle as he watched over her. When all three people caught sight of Hashi, their faces let out surprised expressions. Shi-san and shopkeeper Zhou immediately walked over to surround her. Because Shi-san had followed Hashi for the longest, he immediately started speaking without worries. "Gongzi, the pills you gave me last time are nearly sold out. Even though we limit the amount that you can buy, we still can't meet the demand. Moreover, those people are too enthusiastic and too crazy. They've made it so that we have no other choice but to close down shop in the afternoon at Shinsher 1. Otherwise, there would have been no other way we could have been selling pills for so many days." Hashi faintly smiled on response. Then she took out a storage ring and tossed it over to Shi-san. Catching the ring, Shi-san used his divine knowledge to look through the storage ring, and immediately turned lifeless. His two eyes protruded out, and for a while he didn't breathe. When shopkeeper Zhou saw that Shi-san didn't say anything for so long, he snatched the ring away without any explanation, and used his own divine knowledge to look through it. But when he looked through the storage ring, shopkeeper Zhou couldn't help but let out a cry of surprise. "Oh my days! These are all pills. There are several thousand here, right?" But Hashi's expression was indifferent as she threw down an even heavier bomb. Altogether, there are 16,000 pills. A majority of them are top-quality, first-ranked supplement spirit pills, and there are also a few second-ranked supplement spirit pills in there too. 1 Shenshur, 3 to 5 p.m. My energy is limited. I only refined 5,000 of the best quality supplement spirit pills. The remaining 2,000 best quality pills are comprised of Easing Meridian's pill, as well as other extraordinary efficacies. There are even fewer second-ranked best quality pills. In total, there's only about 800 or 900 of them. In the very back corner, there are about 80 third-ranked best quality pills. These pills improve one's dantian deposits and purifies spiritual power. This pill is effective toward martial artists who are at meridian stage and above. Even nascent soul stage martial artists will receive benefits from this pill. Oh. As for the name of this pill, you guys can think of a name yourselves. Although the overflowing cauldron pill scripture had the name of this pill, Hushi was worried that people who thought a little too deeply about the pill would be able to connect it to Shumi Taoists, and in turn, bring about trouble to Dan Dan. It was better to just leave the naming of these pills to Shi-san and the rest of them. In any case, she didn't follow the recipe from the overflowing cauldron pill scripture, word for word. She had made her own improvements. So even if she created a new name, there was nothing wrong with it. Once Hushi said these words, Shi-san, shopkeeper Zhou, and even Gu Lufeng, who was sitting on the bed, let out shocked expressions. The room was deathly still, apart from Gu Yolan's steady breaths. The room was so quiet, the sound of a needle dropping could have been heard. Hushi looked at them in confusion and suspiciously asked, "What? These pills aren't sufficient? If it isn't enough, I'll bring some more in a few days." "It's enough. It's enough. How could it not be enough?" Abruptly, shopkeeper Zhang came back to his senses and shouted with a trembling voice, "Shigongziyu, in your eyes, are these pills nothing more than ordinary candies, ah?" In ordinary medicinal halls, their inventory has around these many pills have many years. Moreover, the majority of the pills they have are all middle and below ranked pills. You were actually able to procure thousands of pills in such a short period of time. Don't tell me that you only obtained all these pills in just these few days. Right? You could say that. Hushi waved her hand at him and unconcernedly said, "Since it's like this, then this is the best situation. After some more time has passed, I'll come back with more pills. You guys need not worry about the issue of supplies. As for how you wish to sell these pills, I won't have a hand in this. You could use hunger marketing or cut down the prices, but it's all up to you guys to decide." Shopkeeper Zhou was startled stupid by his new boss' heroism, so much so that he couldn't even formulate words. On the other hand, Shi-san had pride plainly written across his face. His entire body radiated with his pride. His family's miss was just too awesome. Other families needed 10 or so pill refining masters just to be able to support their medicinal hall, but his family's miss could do this completely by herself. And based on the actions of the bustling crowd outside, it could be assumed that the pills his family's miss refined weren't just any regular pill that other pill refining masters could make. But then he thought of the pharmacy's chaotic scene nowadays, recalling how everyone fought one another just to buy one pill. With this in mind, Shi-san couldn't help but pursue his eyebrows again. He neared Hushi and quietly whispered to her, "Miss, the pills you're making are truly too good. Those martial artists that come here to buy them also have fiery tempers. If they were all to erupt and cause chaos, shopkeeper Zhou and I wouldn't be able to calm them down. In addition to this, the few manservants we bought for the hall don't know the slightest bit of knowledge regarding medicines. Therefore, when the hall gets busy, they're simply unable to keep up with everything and aren't very helpful." This problem was actually quite troublesome. Hushi bent her finger and lightly tapped the surface of the desk. But suddenly, it seemed as if an idea struck her as she turned to look toward shopkeeper Zhou and Shi-san, slowly telling them, "I currently don't possess enough crystal stones to be able to entice any doctors or guards to the hall. However, if I pay them using high quality, or even top quality pills, do you guys think that there would be anyone willing to come be a waiter or guard?" 1/3 bonus chapters sponsored by Alexa Redheart. Regular updates will resume after June 26th. Hushi nodded her head and decided to hand over the preparation of these matters to Shisan and shopkeeper Zhou. But Hushi still had some worries. These rewards would only attracted foundation establishment stage martial artists. At most, they would only be able to become the hired thugs and guards for the hall. But if an expert or someone with a lot of power came to provoke the hall, these guards wouldn't be strong enough to keep them at bay. Regarding Meridian Stage and Gold Core Stage martial artists, they weren't impossible to attract either. After all, with money, you could do anything. But on the other hand, Hushi didn't have enough funds to pay them, and merely 1 or 2 bottles of pills wouldn't be able to have those high-level martial artists bowing their heads and taking orders. Secondly, by attracting high-level martial artists, they would naturally be guarding inside the inner hall. With these circumstances, it would be impossible for them not to touch upon Shengda Hall or her own secrets. If there was a spy sent by another family in the midst of these guards, then all her secrets would be exposed, and this was just too risky for Hushi. Unlike her current situation, the guards in large, influential families usually began their training at a young age. Under the family's watch, or the family, had some sort of handle on the guards that kept them from betraying them. When shopkeeper Zhou heard Hushi's concerns, he turned over to look at Gu Lufeng, but didn't say anything. But Gu Lufeng, who had been quietly sitting to the side and listening, suddenly opened his mouth and said, "Young Shuer, come follow me for a moment." Hushi didn't think much of it and mindlessly followed Gu Lufeng downstairs and into Shengda Hall's rear courtyard. There, Gu Lufeng led her to a corner and suddenly took out a jade slip, slowly beginning to channel his spiritual power into it. Soon, the jade slip began to glow with a soft light, and a passageway that could fit 2 people walking side by side appeared in the corner that had originally been surrounded by 3 walls. 2/3 bonus chapters sponsored by Alexa Redheart. Regular updates will resume after June 26th. Without hesitation, Gu Lufeng took the lead and slowly walked into the passageway. Hushi quietly walked behind him, studying the passageway as she walked along. She truly didn't expect there to be such a passageway in Shengda Hall's rear courtyard. Along the way, the passageway was deadly silent. All that could be heard was their quiet footsteps echoing in the passageway as they walked. But suddenly Hushi heard Gu Liufeng's soft and low voice sound out. "After that day, I looked into the name Nalan Hushi. Then, I came to understand that Nalan Hushi was Nalan Zhengzi's concubine-born daughter, who had always been abandoned to their courtyard located at the foot of Tsang Mountain. Furthermore, the rumors said that Nalan Hushi was weak, ugly, and suffered humiliation and bullying in courtyard, but was unable to rebel against it." Hushi's footsteps faintly paused at his words and she raised her eyebrows. Afterwards, Gu Lufeng turned his head around. In the dim passageway his appearance was fuzzy, but his eyes were brightly lit up. "But the type of person Nalan Hushi is and how she lived her life doesn't concern me. This is because the person I've come to know is genius Dr. Shiyu. The person I've sworn loyalty to is Shiyu." Hushi's mouth lifted into a shallow smile, but she didn't respond. And Gu Lufeng no longer spoke either. He merely turned around and proceeded to walk further inside the secret passageway. After walking for about 7 or 8 more minutes, a small transmission array could be seen at the end of the passageway. At the sight of the transmission array, Hushi was filled with amazement. One had to understand that transmission arrays weren't at all common in Miluo continent. This was due to the fact that transmission arrays needed array masters at great scholar level to be created. And after their creation, they needed a large amount of crystal stones, every day, to stay open. Up until this point, Hushi had always thought that Gu Lufeng only had 1 medicinal hall under his name. But she understood, if he only had a single medicinal hall, it would be impossible for him to keep this transmission array open. As they neared the transmission array, the light from the array turned brighter and brighter, and in the blink of an eye, the pair appeared in the middle of a remote jungle. This is Yanjing City's northern outskirts. Because its spiritual qi is weak, just like the spiritual qi at the foot of Tsang Mountain, few people reside or visit here. Gu Lufeng kept leading Hushi forward, and after a bit, they finally arrived in front of a courtyard. The northern outskirts were already uninhabited, and the courtyard was hidden amongst the trees. So if somebody wasn't intentionally trying to find the courtyard, they would truly pass by it without a second thought. They slowly walked until they reached the middle of the courtyard. Gu Lufeng didn't say anything. Instead, he clapped his hand in the middle of the air. Soon, 5 silhouettes could be seen descending from the sky. Their extensive training was evident as they lined up in a line and bowed toward Gu Lufeng. "Greetings to young master." But there wasn't a hint of surprise on Hushi's face when she saw this scene. From the moment she entered this second courtyard, she already felt the presence of 5 powerful and steady breaths hidden all around the courtyard. It seemed as if those 5 breaths belonged to these 5 people. Gu Lufeng looked at Hushi and faintly smiled. "Shiyu, over these past years, I've been secretly cultivating various powers in order to contend against Morong family, in the hopes that I'll one day be able to bring my mother back from Morong family. These powers are in various aspects, but it wouldn't be good for me to show my own face, so I trained these 5 people who would deal with each individual power. These 5 people have been by my side for the last 10 years, and their reliability is unquestionable. Shiyu, you have my full permission to send them on any errands you need them to go on." Hushi swept a glance at the 5 persons, and discovered that each of them were at Meridian stage. The one who seemed to be leading the group looked to be a male around 30 years old. He was tall and his whole body had rugged-looking flesh. His eyes were tiger-like and his whole body radiated coldness, and even carried a small trace the smell of blood. His cultivation seemed to have already arrived at the summit of Meridian stage, and was nearing Gold Core stage. 3/3 bonus chapters sponsored by Alexa Redheart. Regular updates will resume after June 26th. The person to the left of him was a beautiful woman who wore colorful makeup and beautiful clothing, which didn't fully disguise her plump curves. If one were to look at her from the outside, they would assume that she was a female brothel keeper. But even though she looked to be a romantic woman on the outside, she actually had a high-level Meridian stage cultivation level. The second male appeared to be about 40 years old. His figure was short and plump, and the smile that rested on his face resembled that of Mithriya. 1. But the spiritual power fluctuations on his body were practically non-existent. If it weren't for the fact that Hushi's senses were keener than most, she would practically be unable to sense the fluctuations at all. The clothes of the other 2 people resembled those of imperial bodyguards, and the final person's clothes resembled that of a medicinal hall shopkeeper. All 3 of them were at the middle of Meridian's stage. Gu Lufeng pointed at the first male and introduced him. "This is Chen Bai. He has been by my side the longest, and is also the brother who I pass life with. Under him he has established an army of hired soldiers. Although all of these soldiers are only at foundation establishment stage, each of them has strengths that far surpass any other martial artist at the same stage. It could be said that this army of troops was the one I spent the most thought on to create." Chen Bai bowed in response to Gu Liufeng's words. This subordinate's life was saved by young master. It is this subordinate's willingness to be by young master's side. This subordinate doesn't dare to be called brother by young master. His words were full of respect, but he held a suspicious expression as he closely examined Hushi. This youngster was at nothing more than foundation establishment stage, and didn't seem to possess any special qualities. Yet young master was personally introducing them, the 5 guards, to him? What for? Hushi nodded her head but didn't say anything. Gu Lufeng moved on and pointed at the soul woman. Mei Ru Yan is the boss at Rui Fang. She is mainly in charge of gathering information. Rui Fang? Wasn't that the famous place for singing and dancing? It was similar to a brothel, but considered to be a higher grade than a brothel. The women inside were all multi-talented. They didn't sell their bodies, instead they sold their skills. Some of the women even had a low level of cultivation, causing their dances to appear immortal-like. In turn, this earned the love of the martial artists in Yanjing City. She didn't expect that Ru Yifang was also one of the powers under Gu Liufeng's hands. When Mei Ru Yan heard Gu Liufeng's words, she turned to bewitchingly smile at Hushi. Her flirtatious eyes wandered over Hushi's body and she said, "Young brother, do you wish to go to New Jia's to Ru Yifang to take a stroll? Since you're such a handsome brother, Ru Yan will allow the sisters inside Ru Yifang to entertain you for free." In this moment, Hushi didn't know whether she should laugh or cry. She was a woman. Yet this female brothel boss had taken her liberties with her. Not only that, but she also used charming techniques on her. Should she be joyous that she played the role of a man extremely convincingly? Clear Phoenix's eyes suddenly flashed with coldness. When Mei Ru Yan saw this, her enchanting smile changed into dread. Her figure flashed, and in seconds, she was kneeling on the floor. Hushi turned around to see Gu Liufeng's laughing face, and couldn't help and fix him a glare as well. Gu Lufeng caught his expression and lowly coughed when he saw her glare. Carrying on with the introduction, he pointed at a person standing behind Mei Ru Yan and Chen Bai and said, "This person is the shopkeeper of Intoxicated Immortal House." Gu Lufeng pointed at someone and continued, "His name is Wei Dexiao and he's a famous spiritual cook in Yanjing City. But, naturally, his cooking can't compare to Little Yuer's." He pointed at another person. "This is the leader of the squadron that guards the inner imperial palace, Zhang Desheng. Finally, this is Zhou Huayan who's in charge of Shengda Hall's western branch. He's Yanen's younger brother, and is a second-ranked doctor." After he finished introducing the 5 people to Hushi, Gu Liufeng's expression deepened as he looked at the 5 people kneeling on the floor. "Today, I gathered the 5 of you here today, because there is something that has to be announced. The person standing by my side is called Shiyu. From this day onwards she is our master. 1 Mithriya. The Bodhisattva that'll appear on Earth in the future. Some more information can be found here https://en. Wikipedia. org/wiki/Mithriya. 2 Nujia. A humble way to reference oneself for females. The build-up before the climax had been immense, but Gu Liufeng's words were few when they finally reached the top. But nevertheless, his few words shocked the 5 people kneeling on the floor, who turned to each other with looks of dismay at his revelation. Each of their faces carried shock and disbelief. Chen Bai, whose cultivation was the highest, couldn't help but ask, "Young master, why do you say that this youngster is our master?" "The reason is that I've already decided to follow Shiyu and regard her as my master. If you no longer wish to follow me, then you're allowed to leave. However, if you wish to continue staying by my side, then you need to put her in your heart, in a position that's even higher than mine. Moreover, you also have to respect and listen to her." Filled with disbelief, Bai Chen blurted out, "But she's only at foundation establishment stage." The 5 of them had been by Gu Liufeng's side for so long. Between them, there existed a strong bond of camaraderie, as well as the fact that they all deeply respected Gu Liufeng's strength and methods. Gu Lufeng was at the summit of Gold Core stage, but what did the youngster in front of them count as? She was nothing more than an insignificant foundation establishment stage martial artist. Yet he, Gu Lufeng, expected them to bow and submit to her? Don't even talk about Chen Bai, this high-level expert that felt disdain toward this thought. Even the male resembling Mithriya had a disdainful expression painted on his face. Gu Liufeng's eyes deepened and he coldly stated, "Regardless of Shiyu's cultivation, I still stand by my words. If you wish to continue following by my side, then you must regard Shiyu as your master from now on. If you don't wish to do so, you can voluntarily leave." Chen Bai and the rest of them had shock painted across their faces when they heard Gu Liufeng's words. They wanted to argue some more, but as always, they were blocked by the respect they held for Gu Lufeng and didn't dare speak out. But the gazes they directed toward Hushi were all filled with questions and resentment. In their minds they were all wondering if this youth, who was even more beautiful than a woman, used his beautiful looks to seduce young master, causing young master to become confused and hand over all of the power in his hands to the youth. Hushi looked at their expressions and knew that they didn't have complete trust in herself. The only thing hindering them from flaring up was the respect they held for Gu Lufeng. A shallow smile appeared on her face as she stepped forward to slowly say, "I know that you don't fully accept me. Today my mood is good, so I'll offer you guys an opportunity." "What opportunity?" The questioning voice just sounded out when purple vines suddenly shot out from Hushi's hand. They resembled lightning strikes, as they all struck the ground, one after another. The only sounds that could be heard were "Huala." On the floor, cracks similar to a spider web began to appear on the floor, with the one in the middle being the deepest one. Hushi sneered. Whoever feels discontent can step out now. Regardless of whether you decide to fight together, in a group, or fight one-on-one, and regardless of what methods you use, as long as you can defeat the purple whips in my hand, I'll have Gu Lufeng take his decision back. How about it? Hushi was actually downplaying the whipping, but it still caused the 5 people's complexions to change. The ones whose expressions were most affected were Zhang Desheng and Zhou Huayan. They were 100% positive that they would be unable to produce such sounds, even if they had the same whip. But Chunbai, who had the highest cultivation out of all of them, had a gloomy face as he stepped out and declared, "I don't accept." This person was nothing more than a trifling foundation establishment stage martial artist. Yet, when he was handed a high-level weapon, he immediately turned unbridled. He was at Gold Core stage and the leader of a mercenary group. How could he possibly be scared by this? The purple vines in Hushi's hands softly swayed as Hushi sneered. Let my words be marked. Today my mood is good, therefore, I'm offering you guys a chance to provoke me. But if you lose today, in the future you can no longer act rude towards me. Otherwise, don't blame me if I'm rude. While she was speaking, the purple vine unexpectedly transformed into 5 separate roots, and went in the direction of the 5 people. Don't dawdle. It'd be better if all 5 of you went up at once. This way, we can avoid having you all go one at a time, and my time won't be wasted. When the 5 people heard what she had said, all of their expressions turned unsightly. Hushi's unbridled manner showed that she looked down upon them. In fact, she seemed to not even put them in her eyes. Bai Chun and Mei Ruyan both exchanged glances with each other. Soon after, Bai Chun let out an earth-shattering scream and a large, golden knife suddenly appeared in his hands. And Mei Ruyan's hands suddenly transformed into multicolored silks, tightly encasing everyone in a bubble. Bai Chen's large knife was also covered by the multicolored silks, facing toward Hushi as it whistled with cold air. Similarly, Wei Dexiao and Zhang Desheng each took out the weapons they were most proud of and stood to the side, closely watching the scene in front of them. If Hushi were to expose any hole on her end, they would immediately jump in and help. Hushi looked at the sharp blade and the 4 satin fabrics flying toward her, and to everyone's surprise, she didn't reveal fright. Instead, she had a leisurely smile on her face. Her footing on the ground loosened a bit as she prepared herself. Moments later, her body lifted off the ground as she soared in the air. The purple vine simultaneously flew into the air with her, choosing to revolve around her entire body. In regards to the weapons flying toward its owner, it merely let out 2 shrieks and Mei Ruyan's multicolored silks immediately broke into pieces, falling apart. Warm sunshine lay scattered across her peerlessly white, jade-like face, slightly blinding her gleaming, phoenix eyes. The pieces of the multicolored silks danced in the breeze, surrounding her whilst they slowly drifted to the floor. This scene caused Hushi to look like an immortal fairy descending upon earth. Bai Chen's knife was still frozen in front of her face, mere inches away from pushing forward and forever scarring her. But what happened moments later caused him to turn stupefied, completely forgetting about harming Hushi. This was because the youth that was just in front of him mere moments before suddenly disappeared without a trace. The only remaining pieces of evidence that the youth was there at all was Mei Ruyan's shocked face, and the tattered remains of her silks still fluttering in the air. As for that youth, who was the target of his sword, she was just like a fairy, coming to nimbly rest at the very tip of his knife. She stood alone, looking down on him. Under her arrogant gaze, he found himself feeling lowly, as if he was someone without any power or ability to rebel against her. To the side, Wei Dexiao and Zhang Desheng were still feebly holding on to their weapons. For a moment, they couldn't retreat nor could they advance, so they were left not knowing what to do. Hushi stood on the edge of Chunbai's sword with one foot. Her expression was calm, as if she wouldn't be caught off guard, regardless of any situation she faced. When she opened her mouth to speak, her voice was strong. I'm very disappointed in you guys. If we were truly fighting, you guys would have already died multiple deaths under my hands. However, you guys didn't even recognize that your lives were circling around the entrance to the gates of hell. Once she finished speaking, She jumped into the air again before softly landing back on the ground. Her black, satiny hair flew up when she did and softly fell back down once she landed. Her hair's movement caused a faint aromatic smell to linger in the air, sending confusion into everyone's mind and seducing their souls. Gu Lufeng, who stood by her side, couldn't help but press his temples and look away from her. He worried that he would be unable to help himself if he kept looking. Scared that he would be unable to stop himself from merely wanting her by his side, from being unable to stop himself from letting her never leave, and from being unable to stop himself from gathering her in his embrace. She was such a beautiful, dazzling, and unrivaled woman. It was no wonder that even His Highness King of Hell couldn't free himself from her charms. When Hushi landed on the ground, she coldly gazed at the stomachs of Bai Chun and the others. Once Bai Chun returned to his senses, he curiously bowed his head to have a look at what Hushi was looking at. Once he caught sight of what was in front of him, his face transformed and was filled with shock. This provoked everyone else's curiosity, so they all looked down and saw that each of them had a purple mark on the left side of the chest. This was evidently the doing of the purple vine that was currently wrapped around Hushi's hand. It was clear that if Hushi were to wish to kill them, she could have very easily caused them an unnatural death during their fight, just then. The death would have been so sudden that they wouldn't have even had time to retaliate before it was over. Hushi withdrew her purple abyss vine and smiled. What? Is there still someone who's unwilling to accept? Suddenly, the second courtyard turned quiet and tranquil, and even the sound of breathing couldn't be heard anymore. Bai Chun broke the silence by bending down on his knee and clearly saying, "Subordinate Bai Chun pays respects to master." This time, his voice was willing and didn't hold any traces of unwillingness or questions. Although the youth in front of them was only at foundation establishment stage, she was actually able to leave all 5 of them, martial artists at Meridian stage, completely powerless. With this God-given talent and strength alone, she was fully qualified to be their master. Following Bai Chen's lead, Mei Ru Yan, Wei Deshao, Zhang Desheng, and Zhou Huayan all uniformly kneeled down and loudly said, "Paying respects to master." Hushi nodded in response and asked each of them to repeat their jobs as well as the subordinates under them. Her main focus at the moment was the troops that Bai Chen lead. After all, on Miluo continent, one's fist was what determined who got the last word. As it turns out, the troops were made up of about 50 to 60 people. Among them, 80% were at foundation establishment stage, and the remaining 20% were at the initial stage of Meridian stage. The troops usually took missions from the black market. This way, they earned profit and also, conveniently, promoted their strength. By now, they had become somewhat well known in the black market for their work. Hushi said to Chunbai, "Pick out 4 experts at Meridian stage and have them stand guard in Shengda Hall for a period of time." Chunbai replied, "Young master has already informed me of this matter. This afternoon, those 4 people will report to Shengda Hall, asking master to rest assured." Hushi contemplated something for a moment before ultimately deciding to take a bottle of pills, and threw them over to Bai Chun, instructing him, "This counts as compensation for your troops being short 4 people. Give this to people who are at high-level foundation establishment stage. In under a year, they'll be able to break through to Meridian stage." Chunbai caught the bottle of pills, and was just about to ask Hushi what these were for. But when he heard what she said, he was suddenly speechless. Coincidentally, Zhou Yenin walked into the second courtyard at the same time, and caught sight of Bai Chen's speechless expression. Laughing, he said, "Chen Xiong, you've received a large profit. The pills in your hand right now are top-quality second-rank Ning Yuan pill. It's the holy pill that's the best for martial artists hoping to break through to Meridian stage. If this pill were to be brought to Shengda Hall to be sold at 100,000 yuan crystals, people would still be breaking each other's heads just to get one. I didn't expect that you would get an entire bottle of these pills from Gongzi for merely giving out 4 martial artists at Meridian stage." At first, Bai Chen's face was wooden as he gripped the bottle of pills in his hand. Then after a moment his face lit up with joy and he knelt down. "Many thanks to master for bestowing these pills." Mei Ru Yan and the others all looked at the porcelain bottle in Chen Bai's hands with envy. Each one of them wished to rush over there and snatch that bottle away from him. None of them doubted that Hushi refined these pills themselves, but they also knew that it was impossible for someone merely at foundation establishment stage to refine a pill like this. After all, martial artists at that stage couldn't even create their own spiritual fire. They could only rely on outside sources for a spiritual fire. Furthermore, if someone at that level were to refine a pill this method, refining a pill that had an essence purity of 60% or higher was impossible. Hushi saw each person turn to look over at her. Under their burning gazes, she hesitated for a moment before taking out storage rings and throwing one at each of them. We'll consider these rings as today's first meeting gift. In the future, work hard. Regardless of whether it's pills or treasures, there'll be many in store for you guys. After she finished speaking, she turned to Gu Lufeng and waved her hand. Their two figures flashed and two streaks could faintly be seen heading toward the transmission array. Their abrupt departure was due to the fact that Gu Yulan's drug addiction was soon going to flare up again. Hushi was racing back with Gu Lufeng in order to treat it. The 5 people left behind silently watched Hushi's departing figure. Hushi's departure was so sudden it left them momentarily speechless. Soon after, someone used their divine knowledge to explore the storage ring, and an Aya was heard soon after that. So many treasures. There are even attack charms. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.